Hey, everybody. Thank you for being patient. Some nights I start on time, other nights not as much, but here we are. We're back. We're here. And yeah, I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight. So let's have yet another one of our great late night conversations. Yeah, I'm going to put on the opening music and we'll do what we always do on this channel. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, here we go. Here we go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Yep. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. If you have something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, the way that works is you go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin, or you send a super chat because we're monetized. Super chats work. Or you can send a Rumble rant if you're watching on Rumble. And that's the way it works. I give first my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call. We find out who's watching. And then I just answer questions. Second half of the show is all you guys. It's all you guys asking questions. If you have a question and you're watching this afterwards, most of the people who watch this don't watch it live. They watch it afterwards. So if you have a question while you're watching this, send it to buymeacoffee.com and I'll answer it the next show. We do that. So yeah, that's how it works. Second half of the show is all me answering questions from the audience. Good times, folks. Good times. In terms of announcements, tune into the Jimmy Dore show tomorrow because I'll be on it. Garland Nixon is guest hosting, and I'll be doing a segment with Garland Nixon. So tune in for that. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'll be on the Jimmy Dore show again, right? Second time this month. That'll be awesome. I love the Jimmy Dore show, and I love Garland. I love Keaton and Do Dissidents guys who have had me on before, and I love Jimmy. Jimmy's a friend, and I've been on a couple times with Jimmy, and yeah. So tune into the Jimmy Dore show tomorrow afternoon. That's gonna be pretty cool. The big announcement that we've got is that the Center for Political Innovation National Convention is coming up August 15th in Chicago. And the link to register for the convention is down below in the description. I'm also going to drop it in the chat. It's going to be quite an event. Looks like a certain internet personality tells me that it's looking like they'll be there. Not 100% confirmed yet, so I'm not going to say who it is, but it's looking good. Also, our whole organization will be there. The theme is Finish the American Revolution, End the British Empire System and its wars. And it's going to be pretty awesome. So I hope that you will join us in Chicago. You can register at this link. It's going to be a great day in Chicago. Our whole organization, we're having our national 7-day program, our training program in Chicago. It's going to be great. It's going to be a lot of fun for everyone. So I hope that you join us for our national convention, August 15th. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. The organization that is behind everything I do, the reason that I do these streams and all that, I am organizing. I am building a movement. And, I would like you to join the Center for Political Innovation because we're a community of resistance, a community of solidarity. And we're doing great stuff to build a community of anti-imperialists fighting for working families, opposing the wars. This is the Center for Political Innovation. This is us. That's us. We are the Center for Political Innovation. Great group of folks doing great stuff. And I really am excited for August. Got to tell you. Part of the reason I started a little late today is I got a little bit of a cold. So if I sneeze during this stream, don't take it personally. Getting over a little bit of allergies here. That's why I didn't stream last night, but I'm back. But if I sneeze, that's because I'm, my face is a little red and I'm sneezing. My eyes are itching a little bit. It's these allergies, right? That's how these things go. But excuse me, you got to get through it. So yeah, that's the Center for Political Innovation. One last reminder, if you do have questions for the second half of the program, send them via buymeacoffee.com. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. That's the best way to send your questions. You can also do what was just done here by Jess B and send a super chat, right? I'll answer Jess B pretty early on because she already sent a super chat. Jesse, could be a man, right? Jesse or Jess, or whether it's a man or a woman, I will answer that question. It's a good question too. And those are the kind of questions I'll answer in the second half of the show. So you can do super chats. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin, or you can do Rumble Rants. So that's how it works. So give me something to talk about in the second half of our show. All right. So we're going to just jump right into it. Folks, I am not Hasan Piker's biggest fan. I'm really not. I don't agree with him on a number of things, one of which is his loyalty to the Democrat Party. I was disgusted by the way he, instead of defending the Uhuru movement, when Joe Biden accused them of being Russian agents and sent the FBI after them, he called them a cult. I'm disgusted by that. There's many other things about him I'm not impressed with. What I think about Hasan Piker doesn't really matter, honestly, and I mean, we kind of have to view this pragmatically, right? If there's somebody out there who says good things and gets a lot of publicity for saying it, that's generally a good thing. I'm not a huge fan of Hasan Piker, but lately I've seen that Hasan Piker is being canceled right now because of the fact that he said something positive about Mao. And the response to this is very, very crazy and over the top. And they're saying, oh my goodness, the fact that Hasan Piker praised Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution, that's so unbelievably unforgivable. Mao killed 100 gajillion gamillion people, and Mao is an evil dictator, and Mao is, and I've been defending. If you look at my Twitter and my X, right, Real Caleb Maupin @ Real Caleb Maupin, I have been just challenging these people who are canceling Hasan Piker, not to defend Hasan Piker, but to challenge what they're saying, because they're saying things about China and about China's history that are false and are pretty easily debunked. But there's just this overwhelming narrative where there's plenty to not like about the guy. We're not here to defend Hasan Piker. All right. We're just not. But of all the things that Hasan Piker has done, praising Mao Zedong, I have no objection to. I think more people should praise Mao Zedong. And what bothers me is that people don't seem to realize, and we're going to get into this a little bit more tonight, but China is the future. I can read you a couple quotes. Elon Musk, who's one of these people who, cancels people for being communists. Elon Musk, what did Elon Musk say? Elon Musk said, quote, "The future is more in China than anywhere else." And Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, he said, "China will remain the central strategic and economic fact of the 21st century." Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, "We are moving from a Western-centered world to a multipolar world in which China will play a decisive role." China is the largest country in the world, that in terms of population, it has a huge economy, the second largest economy in the world. And Mao Zedong, the author of the Little Red Book, leader of the Chinese Communist Party, he is their founding father. And is it really logical and really in America's interest to have this attitude that the founding father of one of the largest countries in the world is Satan? No. And the way we speak about Mao in America is a cartoonish, villainous caricature that is not nuanced in any way, makes absolutely no effort to understand the circumstances of what China went through, and is not going to help America, right? I mean, how do you think we would feel if we went to bookstores in China and they had an American history section and they had books on the life of Martin Luther King Jr., and the books were called Martin Luther King Jr., The Life of a Sex Pervert. And it was all about how Martin Luther King Jr. hired prostitutes. It was all about how Martin Luther King Jr. cheated on his wife. Would that be something we as Americans would appreciate? No, because we see Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as the founder of the civil rights movement, the guy who gave the I Have a Dream speech. He's a beloved national figure that we have a national holiday for. And yeah, there's room to criticize him, just like there's room to criticize anybody else, and people can scrutinize different aspects of his life. But if in China's bookstores there were biographies of one of our beloved national figures and they portrayed him in a purely negative light, we wouldn't appreciate that. What if we went to China's bookstores as Americans and there were books on Abraham Lincoln, and they didn't talk about him being a great leader who defeated slavery, and they didn't talk about, his effectiveness as a political leader and building up a new party, the Republican Party, that's now a major party in the country. But instead, they talked about Abraham Lincoln as nothing but a murderous war criminal, and his soldiers in the Union Army, they did Sherman's March to the Sea and burned innocent people's homes and killed people. And there's a movie called Gone with the Wind that shows you, just how awful it was for Miss Scarlett, the plantation owner. And it was just so horrible. I mean, we wouldn't appreciate that. We'd say, yeah, there were bad things that went on in the Civil War. We'd say, yeah, Lincoln did preside over the death of some Native Americans. That wasn't cool. But, overall, Lincoln was the, key figure in our country in defeating the slaveocracy and the emancipation of slavery. He's one of the most beloved figures in our country. He's on the $5 bill. He's a beloved figure. And we wouldn't appreciate that. And it's really just completely unfair the way they talk about Mao Zedong. And we're going to talk about that here tonight. Now, I'm going to be careful here. Now, we want to be careful. You and I, in our circles of anti-imperialists, we might talk about Mao as a great leader and all of that, but we need to, make a few things clear, right? To people that may not have ever heard this before. First point, right? Mao was not Mother Teresa. All right. And we shouldn't discredit ourselves by pretending that Mao didn't have to do a lot of awful, awful things. Okay. The war that Mao participated in, the anti-Japanese War of Resistance, resulted in millions of deaths on the Chinese mainland. About 500,000 Japanese soldiers were killed as they fought against the Chinese people. A couple million Chinese people died at the hands of the Japanese occupiers, not just soldiers, but many, many civilians. It was a really, really ugly war. And if you think Mao could have fought the Japanese occupiers by being Mr. Nice Guy, and, he could have fought them with hugs and rainbows, you're thinking something else. I mean, Mao had to build an army that was strong enough and ruthless enough to defeat the ruthless Japanese occupiers. And the same for his civil war against the KMT nationalist government. Chiang Kai-shek killed about 100,000 people in 1927. Just to start off, the reason that Mao went to war with Chiang Kai-shek was originally the Communist Party was part of the government, the Republic of China. And then Chiang Kai-shek started exterminating communists and cutting their heads off and killing, and he killed about 100,000 of them in the White Terror. And Mao and all the other communists fled to the countryside because of the White Terror. And in the countryside, they formed the People's Liberation Army that eventually became known as the Eighth Route Army, which is still around today. It's the Chinese military. And it's important to note that, Chiang Kai-shek was a pretty nasty guy, and Mao built an army that eventually defeated Chiang Kai-shek. And if you think Mao could have done that by being, Dudley Do-Right, or, being, Barney the dinosaur, you're deluding yourself. I mean, Mao killed a lot of people, enemy soldiers, people accused of defecting, people, it was a civil war, and people die in civil wars, and people die in revolutions. Civil wars and revolutions and, world wars are pretty nasty events in which lots of people die. So when we talk about Mao not being the Hollywood villain we're all taught that he is, that you will find out he is in American schools, we're not pretending that he didn't have to do things. And, China, before the communists took power, China was such a poor country. I mean, we can't even imagine the extreme poverty that existed. Revolution is not a dinner party. And what China is today, as the second largest economy in the world, with 800 million people lifted out of poverty, is one of the greatest turnarounds in all of human history. No country has ever turned around that quickly. I mean, what the Soviet Union did with Stalin was pretty amazing, but the Soviet Union didn't have anywhere near as far to come as China did. I mean, what China is today and what China was about, a couple generations ago, that is such a big turnaround for a country. I mean, that's an earth-shaking process. And if you think an earth-shaking process like that can be painless and can be done by not stepping on any toes or breaking any heads, that's how these things go. It's important to make that clear to people. I'm actually working on a small pamphlet-sized book that I'm going to put out, mainly to just as kind of, I'm writing it to just kind of make this argument, because the way Mao is talked about in America is totally unfair. But the main thing that you want to talk about when you talk about Mao is these huge numbers that they have, these huge numbers of people killed. Where do they come from? Right? Did Mao personally kill all of these people? No. It comes from a famine that happened in China called the Great Leap Forward, right? That in 1959, China tried to, update and adjust its farming system. And in the process, there was mismanagement and there was a food crisis, right? And there were large number of deaths due to malnutrition because of the Great Leap Forward. That happened. But here's what they're not telling you. And I just can't get over this, right? And they're not giving you the proper context, right? And I made this meme, right, to show people, right? In 1857, China had a famine that killed 8 million people. In 1876, they had a famine that killed 10 to 30 million people. In 1906, they had another famine that killed 20 million people. In 1928, they had a famine that killed 6 to 10 million people. They were having famines like this every 10 years or so. China would have another massive food crisis, and there'd be massive deaths. But what changed? In 1949, the communists took power. And yes, in the early 1960s, there was another famine. But that was the last major famine in China's history. There hasn't been one since. And we're to take from this that communism starves people. Are these people out of their goddamn minds? They were having one of these famines every 10 years. The communists took power, and yeah, there was a famine after they'd been in power for about 10 years. It was an awful famine as they were trying to modernize agriculture. And then there hasn't been one since. They built a modern farming system, right? Prior to the communists coming to power, China was having all kinds of regular episodes of malnutrition. Now, China has a modern food system. And this is the other thing, right? Again, this is what they're not telling you, right? China went from having famines every few years to this is what China does now in terms of food production. These are facts. These are undisputed facts. China produces 48 to 50% of the world's tea. 28% of the world's rice, 24% of the world's potatoes. That's almost 1 out of every 4 potatoes in this world comes from China. Half of the world's apples, 50% of the apples in the world are made in China. 50% of all the world's vegetables are made in China. 40% of all the peanuts in the world come from China. So China went from having episodes of malnutrition every 10 years to where they are now. 48% of the world's tea, 28% of the world's rice. They're making more food than anybody else. And they want to tell us, oh, communism starves people. No, a country went from having famines every few years to being like the center of the global food industry. And they want to tell us that communism starves people and that Mao is a genocidal murderer because of a famine that happened in 1959 to 1962. I mean, it's just, can you think of a more dishonest portrayal of events? Oh, well, when the communists come to power, everyone starves to death. No, when the communists come to power, they're the only ones that are capable of stopping the starving to death. I mean, it's such a distortion of reality. And if you look at what China is today, and you look at what China was a few generations ago, and you take from that communism doesn't work, that communism just starves people. And this is the other thing, right? And this is the other thing that they can't ever get straight. Okay, this is a wild one. Okay, so which one is it? Did Mao kill? They say Mao killed 80 million people, 40 million people, 30 million people. He killed all these people, and they say it was intentional. They say the same thing about Stalin. Stalin intentionally starved people in Ukraine. Well, if that's the case, if Mao sat there and said, I want to kill people with starvation, if that was the intent, then that doesn't prove that socialism doesn't work now, does it? They got what they wanted. They intended to starve people. Mission accomplished, right? That doesn't prove that socialism is inefficient. And if they didn't, right? If they were not trying to starve people to death, and the famine happened because socialism is just so inefficient, then you can't say they intentionally killed these people, then, can you? So which one is it? Their narrative doesn't even line up. It can't be that socialism just doesn't work and these people starved. And Mao intended to kill all these people, so he did. The narrative doesn't even line up. Yes, in the early 60s, as China was trying to develop a modern farming system, there were big problems of mismanagement. There was an episode of malnutrition in the 1960s. But there were loads and loads of episodes of malnutrition before the communists took power, and they haven't had one since. So how do you take from that communism causes starvation? That is so inaccurate and so ridiculous. That is just not an accurate interpretation of events. But that's where this big, communism starves millions of people. That's where this comes from, these big communism death counts. But it gets even crazier than that, okay? It gets even more crazy than that, all right? For example, this is a great one, right? The big book, that's called Mao's Great Famine, right? It's called Mao's Great Famine, and it's all about, how Mao, was an evil guy and killed all these people. And, Mao's Great Famine, it's by Frank Decatur, is the name of the author. And it's this book that was published in 2010 that says that the famine was intentionally carried out by Mao to kill people. It's, that's the book. Well, the original cover of the book has been gotten rid of, right? So let me show you the original cover of the book. This was the original cover of the book. If I can just put up the image here. Hold on. Mao's Great Famine. The author of the book is, it's Mao's Great Famine by Frank Decatur. And this was originally what the cover of the book looked like. Okay. Just trying to get the image to come up on the screen. Hold on. I'm showing you the original cover of Mao's Great Famine by Decutter. Here we go. Right, so look at that, right? It's got this poor, starving Chinese child on the cover. Totally a horrible, horrible image, right? Right, and so that's supposed to be an example of how bad Mao is, right? That he, he starved this poor child, right? This poor child was starved to death by Mao, and that shows how evil Mao was, because he just, was such an evil guy, and he starved this poor child. Well, where do you think that image of the starving child comes from? Where do you think the image comes from? Do you think that's actually a picture from Mao's Great Famine? You think that's actually where that picture comes from? Well, no, actually. That picture is a picture that comes from Life magazine. It was printed in Life magazine in 1946, and I'll pull up the actual image. Yeah. So the actual image that comes from was a photo taken in Life magazine in 1946, and I'll pull it up. Yeah, this is the picture of the starving child with the bowl, and it was taken 3 years before Mao ever took power. That image on the cover has nothing to do with the famine in 1958 through 1962. It's from Life magazine, and it was taken in 1946, 3 years before Mao ever took power. Complete dishonesty. But that's not the only dishonesty in the book, right? That's just the beginning of it. There's a quote in the book. The book alleges, and this is the book, I'll read to you what it says, right? That in the book about Mao's Great Famine, right, that alleges that Mao is a mass murdering dictator because of this Great Famine, right? It says here, right? In most of the cases, the party knew very well it was starving its own people to death. At a secret meeting in the Jinjiang Hotel in Shanghai, dated the 25th of March, 1959, Mao specifically ordered the party to procure up to 1/3 of all the grain, much more than had ever been the case. At the meeting, he announced, "When there is not enough to eat, people starve to death. It's better to let half the people die so the other half can eat their fill." Sounds pretty horrible, doesn't it? Right? People are starving, and Mao said, steal the grain from them. We're going to let half the country die. Mwahaha. Well, actually, the transcript of Mao's speech from the Jinjiang Hotel is widely available. Joseph Ball got the text, and this is what it actually said. Quote, "This can be regarded as a lesson. This analysis is good. For industries, we need to pay close attention to these 3 months. There will be a first emperor in China in the leadership of industries. In order to complete the plan, there needs to be big cuts in projects. We should cut the number of projects from 778 to 500. Applying the force evenly is a way of undermining the Great Leap Forward. All going hungry and starving to death is worse than 1/2 going hungry and 1/2 eating their fill. When discussing, in order to guarantee completion of the yearly plan, we need to concentrate limited resources and personnel and shorten the front line and accomplish the tasks one by one, batch by batch." That's not what he said. He didn't say to kill half the country. He was saying, look, we need to stop. We need to change these policies because people are starving. This is a complete misrepresentation of Mao's words. And I mean, and it's the opposite of what Mao is quoted as saying. I mean, it's like there's a transcript of these things. It's even more interesting. In this book, Mao's Great Famine, Decatur claims that 66,000 people were clubbed to death in this region. That's a lot of people, 66,000 people. That 66,000 people were beaten to death with clubs. What is his source on this? Well, his source is Chinese government documents that no one else can see. And he said, oh, well, I made an arrangement when I got these documents from the Chinese government that I can't show them to anybody. So his source for 66,000 people being clubbed to death is, trust me, bro. And that's how a lot of anti-China scholarship is. A lot of anti-China scholarship is, trust me, bro. For example, this is a book that was a New York Times bestseller. It was everywhere, right? It's called Mao, the Unknown Story. And in Mao, the Unknown Story by Zheng Chang, right? I'm not going to put it on the screen. I don't want to advertise it, but it was a best-selling book, a biography of Mao, Mao, the Unknown Story by Zheng Chang and John Halliday. Mao, the Unknown Story. In that book, right, they claim that one of the most important battles in China's history never happened, right? They claim that the Battle of Looting Bridge, right? The Battle of Looting Bridge. It's like a very, very famous incident in China's history, right? Battle of Looting Bridge. Let's see if I put up an image of the thing. There's movies of it. It's a very famous incident during the Chinese Revolution where they crossed a bridge, right? It was like the Chinese soldiers, they crossed a bridge over the chains, right? It had been burned. The wooden planks of the bridge had been burned by the enemy, and they proceeded over the bridge on just the chain links, right? Here, I'll put the image, the famous image, right? It's a very, very famous incident that happened in China's history. Here, I'm going to get an image that I can show you of where the communists had to go over this bridge where all the wood had been burned, and they were crossing this bridge over a mountain pass. The Battle of Looting Bridge, right? It's like one of the most famous battles in the Chinese Revolution. It's just epic. It's in a lot of movies that they made and a lot of different stuff. Here we go. The Battle of Looting Bridge. All right. This is a very famous incident in the Chinese Revolution. All right, a very famous incident. Right, where the soldiers are proceeding over the bridge that's been burned out. They're going over the bridge on the chains through the mountains or whatever. Very famous. Well, this best-selling book on Mao, the Unknown Story, claims this battle never happened. Claims it never happened. And what's the source? The source is an alleged eyewitness. She talked to somebody. The author talked to somebody who said it didn't happen. Now, could you imagine somebody writing a book and saying that the Battle of Gettysburg never happened? And their source is, well, I talked to somebody. They said it didn't happen. Could you imagine somebody writing a book and saying the Battle of the Alamo just never happened? What's their source? Well, I talked to somebody. They said it never happened. If you're going to claim that the most important battle, one of the most famous battles in China's history, didn't happen, you really need to prove it. Now, revisionist history goes on and people argue about, people debate historical events. I'm not against that. But you can't just say one of the greatest battles in history didn't happen and say, oh, I talked to somebody, right? But if it's Mao in China, you can. And that there is absolutely no fairness in any of this, right? And that's the important thing, right? China today is the second largest economy in the world. 800 million people lifted out of poverty. Mao started that process. But we're not allowed to admire him in any way. We have to think of him as pure evil, as pure Satan, and anything less than that is a scandal. It's a scandal that Hasan Piker, God forbid, said that Mao was a good person. Well, folks, I am going to show you here why that's not fair, right? There is a huge double standard here. First things first, right? the claim, we're told, is that praising Mao is the equivalent of praising Hitler, right? We're told, right? Even though Hitler rounded up people on the basis of their race and gassed them to death, and Mao is accused of having a famine. It's not the same thing, but regardless, that's what we're told, right? Mao is worse than Hitler because Hitler killed all these people, but the number that they give us for Mao is so much bigger. Well, that number comes from a famine, and it's not a real number. But even beyond that, right? First of all, there's a huge amount of praising Hitler in America, right? Pat Buchanan is one of the most well-known conservative voices in America, considered the father of American conservatism. Pat Buchanan wrote this book. This is an actual book by Pat Buchanan, right? And it was a bestseller. And Pat Buchanan goes on national television all the time. He wrote this book. Right? This is Pat Buchanan's book. I kid you not, right? I will put it on the screen. Right? He published this book. It was a bestseller. It was on all the shelves. Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. How Britain lost its empire and the West lost the world. And the book is all about how Hitler didn't want a war. It was just those big, just evil Winston Churchill and those evil communists. And the book is all about how Hitler wanted peace, and it was all Winston Churchill and the communists' fault that World War II happened. This book defends Hitler. This book presents Hitler as the good guy in World War II and presents World War II as being forced on him. And no one's shaming Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan is just, hey, he's just a conservative. He's on national television, whatever, right? Or let's talk about American history, right? I cannot get over Dinesh D'Souza denied the genocide of the Native Americans. I will show you this clip. It's amazing to me. Dinesh D'Souza was on Fox News with Ward Churchill, the Native American scholar, and it was like Megyn Kelly did this interview with Ward Churchill, right? And she brought on Dinesh D'Souza to debate the top Native American scholar in the United States, who I've met, and props to Ward Churchill for defending the Uhuru movement. He's taken a lot of stances over the years that I don't agree with about Nicaragua and other things. But, when it comes to Uhuru, I've met him. I've been in the same room as Ward Churchill a number of times because he's a supporter of Uhuru. I think he may have been in the courtroom with them, their appeal in Georgia yesterday. So, I appreciate him for those things. But on Fox News, they brought on Dinesh D'Souza to debate Ward Churchill. And this is what Dinesh D'Souza said. And I want you to see this because it's just shocking how much of a double standard there is. Right. I will pull it on. Just waiting for the file to download. Hold on. We'll put it on. Okay. All right.
Earlier this week, we showed you some of our exclusive interview with former University of Colorado professor Ward Churchill, a man who spent decades lecturing young minds about what is wrong with America. Churchill eventually lost his job after his essay comparing the 9/11 victims to an infamous Nazi finally hit the national media. He was unapologetic for his hurtful statements, and he still believes those victims
metaphor for, and it occurred to me because you came to America in the 80s, in the Reagan era, and he described his involvement in the Vietnam War and how, to some degree, that had turned him against not just the military, but against America. And it occurred to me, you know, we can think whatever we want about Vietnam, but what I think is remarkable is how a whole generation on the left went through that war, and it wasn't just that they turned against the war, but they made the war a metaphor for the country from the beginning. So they went right back to Christopher Columbus, and they rewrote American history into becoming a series of Vietnams, of war crimes, one after the other, and they haven't stopped. So if the country is bad, it deserves what it gets. And in a sense, the whole thrust of his argument depends on, are we in fact Nazi Germany, yes or no? Now, when I see the World Trade Center, I see something totally different than he does. In fact, what I see is America representing a technological capitalism that is making the whole world better. I mean, if Nike or if Apple opens up a jobs wanted sign in Bombay, the lines will be around the block. Why? Because people are seeing hundreds of millions of people are coming out of poverty in good in the world.
My point, my major point was, for all the buzz terms that sound nice when you put them on, well, I think you see as a form of corporatism here. And corporatism is not necessarily capitalist. Corporatism could be fascist. For example, Mussolini was a corporatist. It could be state corporatism, as in the Soviet Union. That's independent of the ideology you frame it in, and certainly we don't have a free market.
Is there anything good about America?
Is there anything good about America? Yeah, I love to drive back and forth across the place, and there are people.
Have we done anything good in our history?
Have you done anything good in your history? I don't know who the we is here. You talking about the government?
The United States of America. Have we done any good? Boy, because you have a long list of the terrible things we've done. Can you think of anything good we did?
Not off the top, but I'm sure you'll fill in the blanks.
That's the problem with Professor Churchill, because people do not look at him as an honest broker. When you cannot offer one thing, maybe liberating Europe, maybe
that was the Soviet Union,
maybe ending World War II. I mean, nothing. Maybe fighting a war to end slavery.
I think there were 27 million Soviets who died during that war that had a little more to liberating Europe, if that's what you want to talk about.
You're making my point, sir.
Right, but the Soviet Union was directly invaded, so they were merely protecting themselves and fighting the Nazis. They were perfectly happy to be allied with the Nazis before that. You remember?
I do remember.
As for the United States not only liberated Europe but rebuilt Europe, and so former enemies, Germany and Japan, which were against us, are now friends. And
I'm familiar with the history.
Every year, tens of millions of people try to come to the United States. Yeah. They try to come, and if we lifted the curtain.
Let's get to the end where I think the comment that I wanted to highlight is made.
Speak accurately about what the students who are going to these colleges are hearing from their professors, not just about the world, but about the country in which we live.
See, I think we've seen a real shift in American politics, and most people are not even aware of it. I mean, if you go back, for example, to the Truman administration or FDR, the general agreement was it didn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. America's a good country. America is a force for good in the world. The free market system creates wealth, even if you then choose to redistribute it. So there was a pro-American consensus. And what we see now, and we see repeatedly, is that consensus is broken down. And a left has emerged out of the 60s and out of the Vietnam War that sees America in bitter, hostile terms. They see America as the enemy. They actually believe we're the evil empire. And so it is conceivable that they look at their job, their moral job is one of restraining, curtailing, and undermining America. And they're doing that in America. Now, this left has become extremely powerful in the media, in academia, in Hollywood, and it's now moving into the elementary and secondary schools. And the conservatives are all focused on the election. Who's going to take the Senate? Who's going to win in 2016? Not realizing that the culture, the high ground of the culture is being occupied very powerfully by the left. And it's a left in which Ward Churchill is not the mainstream, but he's a perfectly respectable part of it, and has been for 30 years.
Okay, which is that I take the circumstances, situation of indigenous peoples as first priority. And probably the closest approximation that you come up with a general understanding of these neat little political labels to get it affixed on people. It would probably be anarchist.
Techniques.
Jay Bybee is a federal judge at this point.
Agree with it. We teach that stuff ourselves.
I would also point out to you, it's not just former radicals from the left. You got an individual who is eligible for prosecution as war crimes, a full professor of law at University of California. And I wouldn't want to mention John Yu's name, but we're talking about that.
He's the one who wrote the memo justifying the use of
well, he wasn't alone.
extreme
The other
interrogation
one,
techniques.
Jay Bybee is a federal judge at this point, and then you've got a couple that are ones at Harvard Law School.
Are you contending that American academia does not lean left? You're not contending that, are you?
In my experience, it would lean rather further to the right.
Really?
Really.
How do you describe yourself politically?
The way I've always described myself is as an indigenist, okay, which is that I take the circumstances, situation of indigenous peoples as first priority. And probably the closest approximation that you come up with a general understanding of these neat little political labels to get it affixed on people. It would probably be anarchist.
Dinesh, you know, in closing, we've had a couple of these interviews now. You know, we sat with.
Yeah. Well, I want to find the actual clip of when Dinesh said it. I have the quote, but I want to find the actual clip and show it on here. Yeah. Hold on. Let me just pull it up here. Yeah. Dinesh D'Souza's writings are very, very blatant historical revisionism. And I want to actually pull up the actual video of him saying it. I have his quote written down, but I feel like because we're watching this here, we really ought to. Okay, so he didn't say it in his interview with Bill Ayers, or he didn't say it with Ward Churchill. He said it with Bill Ayers. That's why I was wrong. I assume he said this when he was talking to Ward Churchill. He said it when he was talking to Bill Ayers. That's what the issue was. Okay, so I had the wrong interview where he said this. Here we go. I will find you the actual clip. That's what it was. I knew I had the quote from Dinesh. But yeah, we'll pull up Dinesh actually saying what he said, because I want to show you what he said and why it's an issue. So thanks for being patient with me y'all tonight. So yeah. Yeah, but let me pull up the actual, yeah. Now I have where Dinesh said what he said. It was in his interview with Bill Ayers, or his debate, I guess you could say, with Bill Ayers when he pointed this out. So when he made these remarks. So yeah, here we go. And this shows you how unfair this stigma is, right? And how unfair really everything around, you know, the idea is that Hasan Piker, because he spoke positively of Mao and Mao killed all these people, you know, how dare he, right? Allegedly, you know, because we have painted Mao as this brutal dictator, and because we've accused Mao of killing all these people, and we have this narrative about Mao, anyone who praises Mao is irredeemable. That's just such an irredeemable crime. Well, this is what was said on national television.
Killing. It's because it's now part was, and then went right back into American history and reinterpreted American history as a series of crimes visited upon the Native Americans, the African Americans, the Mexicans. So this became a kind of anti-Americanism that was fostered in America, and it became pervasive in our schools, our colleges. It's now part of the media.
Do you admit
so
that?
our culture has been shaped by this.
You don't admit that?
No, I think it's interesting. First of all, both of you are acting like the ends justify the means is absolutely from Mars, but when your ends are in question, like invading Iraq, you're all for it. You're all in, and that's the ends justify. That's a violent end. But on this question of the spirit of '68, we went back and reinterpreted history, and you act as if the reinterpretation of history was some kind of fiction. We did commit genocide against the Native Americans.
Actually,
we did enslave people for 200.
Actually, we didn't. Did you hear that? He just said, actually, we didn't commit genocide against the Native Americans. But listen, it gets worse.
In 50 years. And the question, could you be a moral person and own slaves, I think is something that you dodge. And so what I would say is, look, what I would say is you need to look at the thing honestly and don't be so afraid of the fact that we did terrible, terrible things in our history. And in order to get right with the world, we have to repair those injuries.
But we shouldn't flagellate ourselves for things that we didn't do. So let's for example,
flagellate us at all. I don't believe in flagellation.
Let's look at genocide. The American Indian population shrunk by 80% over 150 years. The main reason for that was not because of warfare or systematic killing. It's because the white man brought with him from Europe diseases to which the Native Americans, did not have any immunities. And so they perished in large numbers. Now, the Europeans, 1/3 of the population of Europe 100 years later had been wiped out by the Black Plague. Where did that come from? Asia.
So, I mean, can you believe this? I mean, if you just open American history books, you can see the massacres of Native Americans, right? The massacre at Jeanette Hutton, the massacre at Wounded Knee. You go through American history. There are so many examples of Native Americans being slaughtered. But he says, oh, they all just died from disease. There wasn't intentional killing. He denied genocide against the Native Americans. And you heard him when he said genocide. No, we didn't. We didn't. Right? And so I guess it's okay to deny and question genocide that's done by the American government. But it's not okay to admire Mao. Like, this is a ridiculous double standard. But I mean, and this is when they talk about whataboutism. Okay. Yes. 2 wrongs don't make a right. 2 wrongs don't make a right. That's true. If you're on trial for murder, you can't get up and say, yeah, well, what about somebody else who allegedly committed murder? You're not that's not a defense, right? It doesn't prove you didn't do it, right? So, it is to some degree fallacious if you get up and say, okay, well, what about this? It's fallacious in the sense that it doesn't disprove what you're accused of. However, it is a way of pointing to the credibility or discredibility of your accuser. It is a legitimate way to criticize one's accuser, right? It's not, it's not honest to get up and say, well, what about so-and-so in response to someone accusing you of doing something. But if you want to show that the person accusing you isn't sincere or has a double standard, it is a legitimate point. So, people shouldn't interpret what I'm about to talk about as an example of this proves Mao didn't do anything. That's not what I said, right? I showed you that, the results of Mao taking power and the results of the Communist Party taking power have been overwhelmingly good for China. And presenting it as it resulted in famines is one of the most utter distortions, ridiculous distortions ever. They cured the famines. China is now a food production powerhouse, thanks to the communists, But we're going to talk about, a little bit of whataboutism. For example, Douglas MacArthur. Right? Douglas MacArthur is a general of the U.S. military. Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur commanded U.S. military forces during the Korean War. During the Korean War, 4 million people were killed in North Korea. Many of them civilians. They blew up every single building over 1 story tall in North Korea. And actually, they would send the pilots out to go bomb, and they would come back with the bombs still on their planes. They said there was nothing left to bomb. I mean, they just carpet bombed North Korea. They bombed the dikes and flooded areas and killed people. I mean, you want to talk about crimes against humanity. Bruce Cummings has written, and he wrote and did a documentary with BBC called The Unknown War. I mean, we're talking 4 million people died as a result of Douglas MacArthur and what he presided over on the Korean Peninsula. But it doesn't stop there. Douglas MacArthur then threatened to drop 5 atomic bombs on China. He went to China and he said, if you send forces into the Korean Peninsula to aid the Korean people, I will drop 5 atomic bombs on China. And he did that without the president's permission. The president of the United States is the only person under U.S. law who has the authority to threaten nuclear weapons. But Douglas MacArthur thought he could threaten nukes on his own. And so he was fired for doing that. Harry Truman, president of the United States, fired him. Now, is it not a problem that this happened? 4 million people killed in an ugly war in which war crimes were widely committed. And then you threaten to nuke China and drop 5 atomic bombs. 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed about 500,000 people. So think about, he threatened to nuke China 5 times. And he did it illegally without the president's permission, and he was fired. Now go to Barnes & Noble and look at the biographies that they have of Douglas MacArthur. And you will find loads and loads of biographies of a guy that is portrayed as a hero, is portrayed as sympathetic, it's not a crime to like Douglas MacArthur. You're not allowed to like Mao, but you're allowed to like Douglas MacArthur, even though he killed 4 million people, even though he threatened to drop 5 atomic bombs and got fired for it because he broke the law in doing so. It's totally fine to love Douglas MacArthur. There's movies about him, right? That's totally acceptable. How does that work? How is it okay to like Douglas MacArthur, but it's not okay to like Mao? Explain that. And this is no offense to my religious people. I am a Christian, and I'm showing you this to make a point, okay? The point that I'm making here is that you have to put everything in context, right? This is not an accusation. This is in the book of Exodus, right? Moses, right? Who took the Jews out of Egypt. Moses, right? Moses. In the book of Exodus, this is what it says Moses did, right? If we're not allowed to praise Mao because he's allegedly tied to a genocide, this is what it says in the book of Exodus about Moses, right? In the book of Exodus, it says this: Moses saw that the people were naked, for Aaron had made them naked unto shame among the enemies. And so then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me." And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves unto him. And he said unto them, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, put every man his sword by his side, and go out from the gate through the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor." And the children of Levi did accordingly to the word of Moses. And there fell the people that day about 3,000 men. So Moses executed 3,000 people because they were worshiping the golden calf and because they were naked. For the crime of worshiping a golden calf and the crime of being naked, Moses got people together and executed 3,000 people in a single day. That's according to the book of Exodus. I don't know anyone who claims that Mao killed 3,000 people in a single day simply for practicing their religion. That's what Moses did. But it goes on. If you read the book of Numbers, right? Moses, is an important figure in the Bible and the Abrahamic religions. This is what Moses is accused of doing. This is what Moses is openly described as doing, right? So in the book of Numbers, chapter 31, it says that the Israelites were fighting a race of people called the Midianites. And as they warred against the Midianites, as the Lord commanded Moses, they slew all the males, and they slew the kings of Midian. Besides, the rest of them were slain, namely Evi and Rakim and Zur and Hur and Reba, the 5 kings of the Midian, and Balaam, also the son of Bor, was slain with his sword. And the children of Israel took all the women of the Midian captives and their little ones, and took the spoil of all their cattle and all their flocks and all their goods. And they burned their cities wherein they dwelt, and all of their goodly castles with fire. And they took all their spoil and all the prey of the men and the beasts. And they brought the captives and the prey and the spoils unto Moses and Eleazar the priest, and unto the congregation of Israel, and unto the camp of the plains of Moab, which are near Jericho. And Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the princes of the congregation went forth and met them at the camp. Right? So it says they killed all the men of the Midianites, and they took all the women and children captive. Well, what happened next? What happened next? It doesn't stop there. They killed all of the men of an entire race, of an entire ethnic group, and they took all the women and children captive. But then what? And Moses said unto them, have ye saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord. And there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and every woman who hath known a man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Now, what is that? That's exterminating a race of people, killing every male. And then Moses says, that's not enough. Kill all the females who are not virgins. Kill all the male children. And then the women, the females, they're your property now. That's sexual slavery. That's genocide, exterminating a race of people. You know, and if you talk to Christians about this, and I am one, I will tell you this took place 4,000 years ago in the context of the ancient world when, you know, the Israelites were in the desert fighting for their lives, battling against other groups of people. That's not pretty stuff, right? That's pretty evil. That's pretty, you know, these are not conditions where people get to play nice, right? And, you know, according to the book of Numbers and according to the book of Exodus, you know, Moses executed 3,000 people because they practiced the wrong religion. And on top of that, he then oversaw the extermination of a tribe of people, you know, and the sexual enslavement of their female children. These are barbaric conditions. But yet, you know, have you ever, you know, there's a Hollywood movie, a popular cartoon movie about Moses, the Prince of Egypt, right? So if we're mad at Hasan Piker because, you know, he said something nice about Mao, shouldn't we be mad about the Prince of Egypt? Shouldn't we be mad that there's a kids movie about the guy who killed 3,000 people in one day because of their religion and then ordered the extermination and sexual slavery of an entire tribe? But there's a kids movie about this guy. Right? There's a kids movie about this guy. Right? I mean, and there's also, you know, one of the most beloved movies, the Bible movie, 10 Commandments by Charlton Heston, right? Maybe I can put on a trailer. Right? One of the most famous, you know, Bible movies starring Charlton Heston is all about the life of Moses. And no one has an issue with that. Moses exterminated an entire ethnic group according to his own scriptures. He, you know, killed 3,000 people, but we're all fine with that. But you're not allowed to say one good thing about Mao. You're not allowed to say that maybe Mao's revolution had a positive impact. You know, I mean, it's a big scandal that Hasan Piker praised Mao. Right? This is the double standard. I just read to you what Moses did according to the Hebrew scriptures. Moses committed mass murder and, you know, exterminated people and, you know, was pretty clearly not a nice guy, but, you know, this is Moses, right? Go to the movies.
My feet are a cradle, the only mother I've ever known. But my feet are set upon a road that I must follow.
From director Cecil B. DeMille.
I will teach thee.
Men shall be ruled by law, not by the will of other men.
Slaves are mine.
The Academy Award-winning film.
Let my people go.
Of the unforgettable definitive Bible story.
I know not his God, neither will I let his people go.
You have not obeyed the Lord.
This night, the Lord our God will deliver us from the bondage of Egypt.
They shall die under my chariot wheels.
So let it be written. So let it be done.
starring some of film's greatest legends. The greatest epic of all time.
Behold his mighty hand! Those who will not live by the law shall die by the law!
The Ten Commandments.
Yeah, so it's okay to praise Moses. You know, we can praise Douglas MacArthur for threatening a guy who tried to drop 5 atomic bombs. That's totally cool. We can praise Moses. That's fine. Dinesh D'Souza can deny the genocide of Native Americans on national television. That's totally fine. But Hasan Piker can't say something good about Mao. Doesn't this annoy you? Doesn't this annoy you a little bit? Like, it annoys me quite a bit. The double standards here. And I feel like people should be smarter than this. They really should be. And it annoys me. And what annoys me the most is that I can't compete with everybody knows. All right. And that, I mean, it's just the truth. I can't compete with everybody knows. And when it comes to Mao, it's just everybody knows. Everybody knows that Mao's bad. No, they don't. Right. 20% of the world's population lives in China. And in China, Mao is still wildly loved. But no, Caleb, I talked to somebody who grew up in China. They said he was awful. Well, they don't represent all of China now, do they? Millions of people in China love Mao. I went to Mao's tomb in Beijing. And when I went to Mao's tomb, I went to Mao's tomb and there were people crying. They were so moved to see Mao. Right? Mao is the founder of modern China, but we're not allowed to say anything good about him. We're not allowed to think of him in positive words. You know, it annoys me, right? It annoys me. And that, you know, we have this way of pretending that it bothers me. And look, for years, there's a level of you have to just experience this. For example, when I was in college, they had an election in Venezuela, a constitutional referendum in Venezuela. What year would that have been? I think it was 2007, right? Constitutional referendum, Venezuela. And the constitutional referendum in Venezuela was on, would they get rid of term limits or not? Right? And it was a vote and they lost, right? The Venezuelan, Hugo Chavez wanted to amend the constitution to get rid of term limits. And the Venezuelan people voted it down. It didn't pass. It was very close, but they voted it down, 2007. Well, the day that election happened, I was a college student. I went to an awful university in Ohio called Baldwin Wallace. And that day, in 3 different classes I was in, one was a communications course, one was a political science course, one was an English course. In every course, my teacher said, they're taking a vote on whether or not Hugo Chavez is president for the rest of his life. And because that's what it said in American media. They're going to make Hugo Chavez president for the rest of his life. And I raised my hand and I said, no, they're not. They're taking a vote on whether or not to get rid of term limits. But in American media, they said, oh, they're voting to make Hugo Chavez the president for the rest of his life. And I would point out to people, no, they're not. They're taking a vote on whether or not to have term limits. And they would look it up and they'd say, oh, wow, yeah, that's true. But then they wouldn't do a double take. They wouldn't go, oh, wait, so they lied to us. So American media is trying to get us to hate Venezuela by telling us things that are not true. And it was just a fact. Everybody knew it was just a fact that they were voting on making Hugo Chavez president of Venezuela for the rest of his life because he's an evil dictator. And I said, no, they're not. They're actually voting on lifting term limits. And then 2 days later, the results came in. It didn't pass. And I remember I said in my political science class, you said Venezuela is a dictatorship. This constitutional amendment that would have lifted term limits, it didn't pass. The people voted no, they didn't pass. And I remember my political science professor said, yes, Chavez is being very smart right now. Very smart, very sneaky. I mean, it doesn't matter. And this is what you have to understand. They will always call any anti-imperialist government, any government that stands up to these motherfuckers, they will call it a brutal dictatorship. Doesn't matter. Venezuela bent over backwards to accommodate these people, and it was still a brutal dictatorship, you know. And Hugo Chavez had a vote on whether or not to, to lift term limits, and they said, "Oh, they're voting on him being president for the rest of his life." And he lost the vote, and he said, "Okay, I voted," and they didn't change the Constitution. And then they said, "Oh, he's being very sneaky, being very smart." It doesn't matter, right? They will always lie. Okay, they will always lie, no matter what, right? And if people could just get that through their heads, and they will always lie about anti-imperialist countries. They will not tell the truth. And so and if they're willing to lie that obviously, if they're going to say that Venezuela, is voting on making him the president of the life, and they just did it. The reason I'm remembering this, I saw somebody in the chat already picked up on this. The whole reason I'm even thinking about this is because they just did it again with Daniel Ortega. It was all over American media. The headline was that Daniel Ortega says they will never again have elections in Nicaragua. Right? Oh my God, did you see that? Ortega, the president of Nicaragua, said there will never be an election ever again in his country. What a dictator. Well, that's not what he said. Right? And I'll show you what he actually said. And this should make you mad. Okay? I try not to get emotional on here, but this should make you angry. He said they will never see another election where they can attempt to seize power by cheating their way into the government. That's what he said. He didn't say all elections are canceled. All elections are canceled. He said they will never see an election where they can attempt to seize power by cheating their way into the government. That's what he said. He said we're going to have fair elections and we're not going to let them, rig the elections to take away our sovereignty as a country. Doesn't this make you mad that they lie to you this blatantly? But yet, and you point this out to people and people go, "Oh, okay." But then they believe the next lie. And it's like at some point you have to shake people and say, if they're lying to you this blatantly, why should you believe them? Right? There's good in this world and there's evil in this world. The people that lie this blatantly are evil. All right? The people that tell us communism in China led to starvation, right? China, communism caused starvation. And then you look at the numbers, and there was a famine in 1857. There was a famine in 1876. There was a famine in 1906. There was a famine in 1928. And then the communists took power in 1949. And there was one famine, and then there's never been one ever since. And they tell you, see, communism starves people. If you can't just understand that the people that run our country and the people that teach our educational system are liars and are evil people, I don't know what to tell you, right? I mean, they are lying to you. They are evil motherfuckers, right? They're evil motherfuckers. And you have to just decide, am I going to be on the side of people who tell me so obviously that, oh, communism in China just starves people when communism cures starvation? People that tell you, oh, Ortega said no more elections when he clearly didn't say that, when they've got elections scheduled for very soon coming up. When people lie to you that blatantly, why do you keep believing them? Well, because they're scared. They're scared, right? And that really what it is some people just don't have any goddamn intellectual courage. Some people are just so afraid. Oh my God. Well, but they're bad. I heard on TV that they're bad. Well, yeah, and they said Martin Luther King Jr. was bad when he was alive. And, they said the founding fathers of America, the British Empire said they were bad. The forces that are in power tend to lie and preach hatred for the people that challenge them. I don't know why that's so hard for people to understand. I really, really don't. Right. And that, if you can't understand that our leaders are lying to us about China, our leaders are lying to us about Nicaragua, right? And you want to jump on this bandwagon where we're supposed to say Hasan Piker is a bad person because he said that Mao wasn't bad and everybody knows. I can't argue with everybody knows. I mean, that's not an argument. At one point, everybody knew that the earth was flat. One point, everybody knew illnesses and diseases were caused by witches. At one point, everybody knew that Bill Cosby was a great guy that everyone would want to hang out with. He was America's dad. He was the most wholesome entertaining figure that ever walked the earth. I mean, there's a lot of things that everybody knew. Everybody knew Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and that's why we had to invade them, because they had them, right? Colin Powell held up the vial. Like how much do people have to see that they're lying? You know, they've got classes in school now, media literacy classes, to try and convince kids not to watch RT, right? You know, that, oh, if you watch RT's, but they can't ever point to anything that RT says that's lying, right? Does RT occasionally make mistakes? Sure, but they correct them when they do, like any other outlet. But they never actually point to anything false that RT says. They're just like, well, it's from Russia. There's some doofus who leaves comments on this chat. Oh, don't listen to Caleb. He works at RT. I mean, can you point to anything I'm lying about? Well, I just showed you that mainstream media is telling you that Nicaragua has canceled the elections forever when they haven't. And they're lying about that. But I guess that's okay. You know, I mean, they're telling you communism caused starvation in China. When communism cured starvation in China, they're lying to you. You know, they lie about everything, but you're not supposed to listen to the people that they say are bad, right? It's infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating to me. And so now we're supposed to cancel Hasan Piker. Hasan Piker is like the worst person who ever existed because he praised Mao. I mean, it is very, very infuriating to me to see this. And I'm working on a little like short pamphlet sized book that should be out like next week. I could write it in one sitting. I've been having these arguments since I was 15 years old. I've been having these arguments with people. And I do at this point see things in a much more nuanced way than I did when I was much younger. But at the same time, like, some things shouldn't pass. And claiming that praising Mao is an unforgivable crime, because praising Mao is just as bad as praising Hitler. Look, all right, so we're talking about World War II, right? And crimes in World War II, right? Let's talk about Michelle Malkin, right? Michelle Malkin is a conservative commentator, right? She's a conservative commentator. She's on Fox News, right? She's just a regular conservative, Michelle Malkin, right? She's Filipino. So I can kind of understand this. I didn't think of this, and I kind of will cut her a little bit of slack because she's of Filipino descent. She's a Filipino descent. She went to Oberlin College. Michelle Malkin, right? She wrote this book. She literally wrote this book. And I guess I kind of will give her a little bit of slack for this because of the fact that she's from the Philippines. But she wrote this book. In Defense of Internment, the case for racial profiling in World War II and the War on Terror. Right? She wrote a book saying that it was okay to round up all the Japanese people and intern them on the basis of their race. And that did not end her career. And no one said, oh my God, she defended Japanese internment. And then she even went as far as to not even just say that Japanese internment was okay, but to go on and say we should do the same thing to Muslims and Arabs. Now, I will defend her a little bit because she's from the Philippines. And to her, Japan killed millions of people in the Philippines, okay? Japan, murdered a lot of Filipinos. So it's not simply just love for U.S. imperialism. It's also about what was done to her people. So I'm going to give her a little bit of slack on that. But she wrote a book defending rounding people up on the basis of their race and putting them in camps and saying it was totally cool for the USA to do that during World War II. And maybe we should do it again to Muslims. And everyone's fine with that. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. But Hasan Piker is saying that Mao did something. Oh, we can't have that. We can't have that. And like the double standard is infuriating to me. It's absolutely infuriating. Absolutely infuriating. And yes, the USA killed a lot of Filipinos also. That's true. And there's you could just go down the line of examples of genocide denial from American leaders, glorification of people who have committed genocide in America. I mean, my favorite example, right? Timothy Snyder, right? How does Timothy Snyder still have a job? I mean, the guy is a Nazi apologist, right? He wrote a book, which Grover Furr debunked, right? But you know, I would recommend read Blood Lies by Grover Furr. Grover Furr went through Dr. Timothy Snyder, the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale. He wrote a book called Bloodlands. And the book Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder is a book that basically says that the Nazis weren't so bad because the Soviet Union was so evil in World War II. You know, it's this book called Bloodlands that tries to claim that the Soviet Union was worse than the Nazis in World War II. That's called Nazi apologia. And Dr. Grover Furr did a very thorough debunking of the book. It just lies. Timothy Snyder lies to defend Nazis. And he's the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale. But Hasan Piker, we're supposed to hate some streamer bro because he said something good about Mao. That's stupid. That's just stupid. Like, we're supposed to hate some streamer bro because he said something good about Mao. But the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale can write an entire book claiming that the Soviet Union was worse than the Nazis. And according to Grover Furr, engaging in academic fraud in order to do it. You know, I mean, and you read Grover's book. I've read Grover's debunking. I mean, it's great. He shows that, like, Timothy Snyder, for example, he says that Soviet soldiers frequently raped Ukrainian women. That's what it claims. And what is his evidence? It's a one Soviet soldier that did that and was put on trial for it and got the death penalty. He says one guy doing something and getting harshly punished for it is proof that it happened all the time. Like, that's ridiculous, you know? That's utterly ridiculous. But Timothy Snyder has a whole book. He made a career demonizing the Soviet Union, claiming that the Soviet Union, that the Soviet Union was worse than the Nazis. And why did he write it? When was Bloodlands published? Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder, right, was published. What year did that book come out? Right? When was it published? When was Bloodlands published? It was published in 2016. 2016. 2 years after the Euromaidan coup, where the U.S. government backed a group of Nazis, people that admire and tear down World War II memorials, and glorify Stepan Bandera. The U.S. government gives money and has given billions of our taxpayer dollars to people who march through the streets of Kiev with torches and honor Stepan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator who rounded up Jews and took them to the concentration camps for the Nazis, was funded and armed by the Nazis to fight the Soviet Union. And that's fine. They tear down the World War II memorials. They put up memorials and they glorify Stepan Bandera. And that's totally fine for the U.S. government to portray them as heroes, to celebrate them and all of that. But no one's allowed. Everyone must be so outraged that, oh my God, Hasan Piker said something nice about Mao. Like, does it not make you angry? It should make you angry. It should make you very, very, very angry. And at some point, I guess what I'm telling you is at some point you just have to admit these people are liars, right? And that there's so many people that I would know, and I would show them things like this over and over and again. I'd show them that no, Hugo Chavez wasn't running for president for life. No, Daniel Ortega is not running for president for life. No, communism did not cause starvation in China. It cured it. You know, and I would show them that, oh, okay, but I just can't agree. No, I just can't be with you. No, well, everybody knows communism is bad. Everybody knows, you know, and they just have to believe, right? Yeah. They just have to believe, right? And you just show them thing after thing after thing, right? And I mean, the U.S. government killed millions of people on the Korean Peninsula. There was an ugly coup. I mean, great example, Indonesia, 1965. The government of Indonesia was violently overthrown. And they installed a military dictatorship that proceeded to start exterminating people. And it killed about 500,000 people. And it started out as just a slaughter of communists. The CIA gave the Indonesian government a list of communists. But then from there, it escalated to just exterminating entire villages. And it turned into a genocide of the ethnically Chinese community of Indonesia. And who was living there at the time? Barack Obama, right? Little Barack Obama, right? was there. His mother married Lolo Soetoro, who was a general in the Indonesian military. And little Barack Obama was living there, and his father was engaged in a genocide against ethnically Chinese people after the USA violently overthrew the government. Yeah, here we go. All right. I mean, it's just, Barack Obama was a kid, and that his stepfather there, who was married to his mother, Ann Dunham, was involved in exterminating people, because they were ethnically Chinese. And when Obama ran for president, right, what was the scandal? It was a scandal that Barack Obama grew up in Indonesia, but the scandal wasn't that his dad was involved in a genocide. The scandal was that he went to a Muslim school. Do you remember this? That's what they turned into a scandal during the 2008 elections. Not that Obama's dad was exterminating people, not that the CIA killed 500,000 people after overthrowing a democratically elected government in Indonesia. No, the story was that, God forbid, Obama went to a Muslim school. I mean, oh my God, can't have that. And I mean, it was a public school. Indonesia is a Muslim country. But, that's what we were supposed to be upset about, is that Obama went to a Muslim school. He went to a school with a religion other than the Christian religion here in America. And that's what we should be worried about. Not that, his father exterminated a race of people. Not that, the U.S. government violently overthrew the government of Indonesia. Not that hundreds of thousands of people were killed for their political beliefs, and then later for their ethnicity, and the U.S. government armed and backed and paid for the whole thing. No. What we should be mad about is that our president may have, gone to a school and learned a religion other than the religion we like. This is the double standard that is absolutely infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating. And, Mao was not Mother Teresa, okay? And that, Mao's China was a very authoritarian place. There's no reason to gloss over this. And there was a food crisis, in the 1960s, but it was the last one. They cured the famines, and that China was starting from a level of impoverishment and underdevelopment. And it's because of Mao's revolution that China has lifted up its head and become a superpower today. And, and to act like praising Mao is just some unforgivable crime. And that's just ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's arrogant. And it's this arrogance that we get from American media, where, it's just, it's assuming you don't know, appealing to people's ignorance. And I find it very, very frustrating. On some level, Dinesh D'Souza and people like that, they just hate their audience, right? Because they're smarter than that. But they're having fun, kind of making fun of their audience. I can say dumb things that I know are like illogical, but my audience is so biased, right? They'll just believe it, and they're insulting their audience, right? I mean, you gotta, they're saying, I've seen things, they say Mao killed 80 million people. I see other people saying Mao killed 10 million people. 70 million is a pretty big margin of error, isn't it? It's a pretty big margin of error. You better get your story straight. There's a pretty big difference between 10 million and 80 million. It's not like something you can miss. Oh, well, they missed a few when they were counting. I guess it was 80 million instead of 10 million. And that right there should show you can't take this bullshit seriously. If they can't decide if it's 10 million or 80 million, they're full of shit. Okay. I'm trying to think, someone goes to the store. Hey, did you buy 10,000 apples or did you buy 80,000 apples? I'm not sure. I don't know. Look, if you can't tell the difference between 10 million and 80 million, there's a chance that both numbers are probably made up. And I think that it doesn't take a genius to realize that. Look, when they published the Black Book of Communism, this was a big right-wing book that was published during the 1990s. Many people looked at it and they said this book, like the way they calculated these numbers is illogical. First of all, many of the people they counted as victims of communism were on the Nazi side or the Japanese side in World War II. you're considering it a crime against humanity to kill people on the Nazi side. There were various people like, Ukrainian nationalists who sided with Hitler during the Second World War, took up arms against the Soviet government, and Stalin killed them. And they're counted as victims. So what? I mean, was Stalin not supposed to kill the Nazis? There were various people in China who became Japanese collaborators and were on the Japanese side when Japan invaded. One of them was the emperor, right? The deposed emperor, right? And they didn't even kill him. They sent him to rehabilitation. He went to prison, and then afterwards he was rehabilitated, the emperor. But, there were various people in China who sided with the Japanese, and they got killed. They were on the Japanese side. China was waging a war against Japan that killed millions of their people at Nanking, some of the horrendous massacres, comfort women, all kinds of awful things were done. They're waging a war against them. But yet, in the Black Book of Communism, all these people who sided with Japan in World War II are counted as victims of communism. How does that work? Another thing is that they include people who were never born because the birth rate allegedly went down. That's a great one. So the Great Leap Forward, some of these big numbers they have are, people didn't procreate because there was a food shortage. So it's like, first of all, they're claiming that the food shortage was intentionally caused by Mao. And so Mao intentionally starved these people and killed them, which I don't think is true. Then from there, they're extrapolating that there were other people who maybe didn't die, but they didn't have kids. And so there were babies that weren't born because there was a food shortage, and we blame that food shortage on Mao. So therefore, we're going to include them. And the numbers include babies that were not born because people didn't procreate and the birth rate wasn't as high as it could have been. Meanwhile, the birth rates in China, the birth rate in China since 1949. Let's look at that. Right, the birth rate in China has significantly increased since 1949. But I guess during the Great Leap Forward famine, there was not, the birth rate dropped because there were food shortages, and so because of that, and it's like the birth rate in America has dropped significantly because of our economic problems. People generally don't have children if economic times are not good. So does that count as a genocide? Right? Because the birth rate in America is decreasing. Do we get to accuse the American government of killing 10 million, 20 million of all the babies that are not born if you calculate the birth rate? This is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's just absurd, but people believe it because it reinforces what they already want to hear. Oh, well, everybody knows the communists are bad. Everybody knows. So if everybody knows it, it must be true. And so it's like you can just get on there and, Dinesh D'Souza, yes, well, they killed 80 million people. It's true, and people want to hear it, right? And Dinesh D'Souza said there was no intentional killing of Native Americans. Oh no, right? It was no. It was just diseases, right? There was no massacre at Jeanette and Hutton. There was no massacres in Arizona. There was no massacres in New Mexico. Oh no. There was no massacre at Wounded Knee. And all these examples where they were slaughtering Native Americans by the thousands. None of that. No. There's none of that. No. It was all just disease. And he says this, and is anyone outraged that he says it? No. So anyway, I've made my point. But it bothers me. And it also bothers me that I have to defend Hasan Piker because I don't like Hasan Piker. I really don't. I'm not a big fan of Hasan Piker. But the argument against him that he's being canceled for all over social media is, and also you'll notice he's not defending himself, right? And this is something I've said over and over again. Our enemies pick our leaders for us. And that's Hasan Piker, right? You think Hasan Piker is like, you think he's a serious organizer? Has he built any mass movement? Has he studied this stuff? No, he's just some dumb dude, bro. He's married to, or he's the nephew of Cenk Uygur. He's from a millionaire family. And, he's not the smartest person, okay? He's not the sharpest tool in the shed. But they've decided to make him the voice of, the voice of tankyism, I guess. And, and of course, the other thing is the reason they've picked him for this is he's not going to get on here. He could never do what I just did, right? Hasan Piker could never do a stream and just say any of the stuff I just said. He's not smart enough. So there's no way he'll defend himself in a way that'll change anybody's mind. And, you know, I mean, it's frustrating to me. It really is frustrating to me. I shout out to Noah. I think Noah was in the chat watching earlier. We took 1,000 copies of this book. Who are the Houthis and what are they fighting for? And we distributed them at the People's Conference for Palestine. And we distributed them and they kicked us out. They removed us. The PSL thugs removed us, right? And we knew we would get kicked out. And they said, you know, later people said we were selling them. We were not selling them. We were just leaving them places. We were just giving them out, right? We weren't selling them. We were just giving them out. And they removed us because PSL are evil people, right? PSL, Brian Becker, they're evil, evil people. And they want to make money and they view us as competition. But anyway, we went to the conference and we handed out these books and they removed us. And we knew that would happen. So after they kicked us out, we got back in our car. I mean, we made a couple other stops. We left them around at the hotels where people were at. We stopped at a couple activist spaces and community centers. And, you know, we got our books out. We went back, right? You know, there's a certain other organization that shall not be named. And they went to the conference. We found out afterwards. And did they distribute any books about educating people about the Houthis? No. Did they, go there and challenge politically? No. They went there and took selfies of themselves. And I looked at that. And why did they even go there? Well, Hasan Piker was there. You know, I mean, it was just like, are you serious? Like, and, you know, and these are the people that talk trash about us endlessly and all of that. And, and we went there knowing this is enemy territory. It's run by the party of sellout liberals, PSL. And it was largely, it wasn't even PSL people on the stage. It was largely DSA people on the stage. There was a couple PSL speakers, but it was mainly, you know, people like Hasan Piker and Rashida Tlaib. And we knew we were going into enemy territory, but we knew there's a lot of Arab Americans that want to help Palestine and do admire what Ansar Allah is doing. So we got the book out. We just distributed them and we were out of there, right? Whereas this other group that is always trash talking us, that, you know, they're better than us and all of that. What did they do? They went to the People's Conference for Palestine and took selfies themselves. Look at us. We're in the same place as Hasan Piker. And like, why? Right? And that is one thing, CPI, that is one thing I'm very proud of. The innovationist turn, the fact that we don't call ourselves communists, we call ourselves innovationists. We're not begging for a place in communism. Communism is run by the enemy. Hasan Piker didn't build any mass movement. He didn't study this stuff. He has no reason. The reason he's the leader of tankyism right now is because the enemy picked him. The enemy gave him the gig. Don't you understand that? The people who control the algorithms, the people who control social media gave him the job because he sucks. Okay? But yet, you know, PSL rolled out the red carpet for him. Oh my God, here's the great Hasan Piker who's come to our conference. Why are you doing that? What did he do to earn that? Well, he's internet famous. Yeah, but, you know, and you know, a certain group that, you know, I think you all know who I'm talking about, right? They went there. Oh my God, we're at the same place that Hasan Piker is. Wow. You know, they're begging for a place in communism. And they're part of the problem. They're part of the problem. This is part of the problem. This is absolutely part of the problem, folks. It's like, you know, and that's why I did the stream. I called it Hasan Piker Praised Mao or the Horror, but I made Hasan Piker look kind of foolish on the cover of this. I'm not doing this to defend Hasan Piker. I'm doing this to make a point, right? They picked him out. They canceled him for defending Mao because he will not be able to defend himself because he doesn't know shit about Chinese history or anything. He's just some dumb streamer bro, right? And they made him the face of something because he can't, you know, logically defend it. And look, folks, we have to be real, okay? You know, and look, I wrote this book for a reason, In Defense of Jerry Healy. It's actually one of my better little pamphlets. I did a very deep dive into the history of the British left. Because Jerry Healy, I've always admired Jerry Healy. The reason I admire Jerry Healy is because I admire Gaddafi. Gaddafi took Libya, one of the poorest countries in the world, and he led a revolution. And he created a state-run economy, and he put oil in public hands, and he built the world's largest irrigation system, and he wiped out illiteracy, and he raised the country up from poverty. They had the highest life expectancy on the African continent, and he gave support to the Black Panthers, and he gave support to the IRA, and he gave support to Nelson Mandela, and he gave support to the Nation of Islam, and he was going to build an African bank with its own currency. Gaddafi was an amazing anti-imperialist leader. And I have always admired Gaddafi. And what really started me on the course of building CPI is that when Libya was destroyed, when the USA bombed and destroyed Libya, the left abandoned Gaddafi. The communist groups didn't do anything to oppose it, right? I was in the Workers' World Party. They spent more time going after me for thinking Libya was socialist and not a bourgeois nationalist regime than they did actually opposing the bombing. We had one meeting at Riverside Church. Ramsey Clark and Sarah Flounders went to Libya and did TV interviews. That was it. I mean, there were a couple little protests, nothing. The Nation of Islam did a very substantial demonstration to support Libya. A couple other groups, but, the group I was in, Gaddafi wasn't cool, right? It was Obama who did the bombing and Libya was destroyed. And that's when I started realizing the left was wrong. And I realized that there were a lot of like Alex Jones fans and libertarians that did support Gaddafi, whereas most of the communist groups didn't support Gaddafi. And even the ones who didn't really support Gaddafi. And that was kind of the wake-up call for me. So I did a lot of investigation into communists who supported Gaddafi. And one of the people that I discovered was Jerry Healy. And I read about Jerry Healy, and I bought a biography of Jerry Healy. It used to be quite hard to get too. Now you can get it on Amazon and stuff, but this was early on, and I bought, Corinna Lotz wrote a biography of Jerry Healy. I bought some pamphlets of Jerry Healy. I became very interested in Jerry Healy. So, it's just one of these little niche topics I'm interested in. I'm interested in the history of communist groups and all of that. And I learned about the life of Jerry Healy, that he recruited a very famous actress, Vanessa Redgrave, who was one of his members of his organization, was his good friend, John Lennon and him were quite close at one point. John Lennon wrote him checks and was friendly to the Workers' Revolutionary Party. I became interested in Jerry Healy. So long story short, right, during the 2024 election, I was very busy. We had our Peace MAGA campaign going on. Peace MAGA, we had my Kamala Harris book got banned and all of that. But during the 2024 election, I was not focused on what communist groups were doing. I was focused on running CPI because we had some very important operations. What we did with the Peace MAGA campaign and what we did with my Kamala Harris book, we did some really awesome stuff during the 2024 election cycle to really advance anti-imperialism. And I actually think that the fact that Joe Kent stepped down as counterterrorism director, that Tucker Carlson, became so anti-imperialist, that Marjorie Taylor Greene broke with Trump, that has a lot to do with us. We amplified the anti-war, anti-imperialist side of what Trump was saying. And Trump betrayed all of it, but we amplified it so much that enough people in his camp, were able to break with him and took it to heart. I think that was important. The fact that we were out in front of Madison Square Garden with a big banner, about Kim Il-sung, and, when Tucker Carlson was inside, and, we did important stuff. But during the election cycle, I wasn't paying attention to it because I was focused on everything we were doing. But during the election cycle, DSA, a very prominent DSA member, one of their professors, who's the leader of DSA in Michigan, published this book, The Party is Always Right, the untold story of Jerry Healy and British Trotskyism. And so after the election cycle was over, I noticed that this was out there, and I started listening to podcasts where they interviewed Aidan Beatty, the leader of DSA at Wayne State University in Michigan. And I started reading. I read the book, and I was like, I couldn't believe it. Jerry Healy died. He died in 1989. But yet, 35 years after his death, they published a smear piece against Jerry Healy. DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, right? And one of their main writers who writes for Jacobin, they gave him a glowing review in Jacobin. He published a smear piece on a man who's been dead for 35 years during the 2024 elections. And the folks at World Socialist website did a really good job. They really investigated, and they called up Jerry Healy's daughter and fact-checked some of the claims, which I would not. They knew how to reach her. I wouldn't know how to reach her. I really will say they did amazing research. As much as World Socialist website, there might be some disagreement. They really took this book apart. They did a great job. And this book is a pack of lies, right? And from beginning to end. I mean, the book starts out by saying that Jerry Healy told everyone that his father had been killed by the British Army and that he watched his father be killed. And this never happened because Jerry Healy is a big liar. There's not one shred of evidence that Jerry Healy ever made that claim. And the World Socialist website, they interviewed Jerry Healy's daughter, and she never heard that claim. And they can't find it in print anywhere. The only people who've ever said that Jerry Healy said this are people who quit his organization afterwards and were defaming him. There's not one piece of evidence that he ever said that in print. There's not one recording of Jerry Healy ever making that claim. It didn't happen. But the first chapter of the book is all about, well, Jerry Healy said that his father was killed by the British Army, and he's a big fat liar. He's a phony. He's a big fat phony. Right? That's the, and it just didn't happen. And that's how the book starts. And it goes from there to say all kinds of crazy things about Jerry Healy that are not true, that are just not factually accurate. And it says things like, well, the only reason somebody would join Jerry Healy's group is because there were only two leftist parties in Britain, the Labour Party, which was reformist, and the Communist Party, which was rigid and doctrinaire. So you had to join Jerry Healy's group. That's ridiculous. There were loads of communist Trotskyite groups, Maoist groups, and all of that. And the Communist Party of Britain during these years was not rigid and doctrinaire. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And there's just example after example. And I just take the book apart in my defense of Jerry Healy that I wrote. But the most important thing is, why did DSA publish this? Why? Why did they publish it? In 2024, why are you writing a smear piece about a dead man? A dead man. Why? Because Jerry Healy was the pioneer of pro-Palestine activism in Britain. Because it was a touchy subject to talk about Palestine. But Jerry Healy did it. And from the 1950s, you can read the pamphlets he wrote. From the 1950s until the time of his death, he spoke up to support the Palestinians when that was a taboo subject, because Jewish folks are statistically overrepresented in communist organizations. Until the mid-'80s, it was very much not acceptable to be pro-Palestine. Jerry Healy was pro-Palestine his entire life. And his organization supported Gaddafi, and they created a pro-Palestine film. The first ever documentary supporting the Palestinians was created by Vanessa Redgrave, and she mortgaged her house and got money from Gaddafi, and she made this film about the Palestinians. And she gave a pro-Palestine speech at the Academy Awards, when she won an Academy Award, and she gave a pro-Palestine speech at the Academy Awards. And Jerry Healy was a leader, a pioneer of the pro-Palestine movement. And who paid for the book? Who paid for the book? Well, I'll show you, right? You can't make this up. You cannot make this up. So DSA, Democrat Socialists of America, publishes a book. They publish a book smearing a pro-Palestine activist, smearing the father of pro-Palestine activism in Britain. During the 2024 elections, here's the book, Aiden Beatty. It's in the acknowledgments. They made no effort to cover this up in the acknowledgments. All right. This is on the first page of the acknowledgments. My research in Britain was funded by the Program on Jewish Studies at the World History Center of the University of Pittsburgh. The fucking Zionists paid for this. DSA got paid by Zionists to put out a smear piece on Jerry Healy. And they don't even cover it up. The Center on Jewish Studies, the Program on Jewish Studies that is notoriously pro-Israel, paid a DSA professor to write a smear piece on a great anti-imperialist activist. Paid for it. And this is what he said. My research in Britain was funded by the Program on Jewish Studies and the World History Center of the University of Pittsburgh, who were generous enough to see the Jewish, Israeli, and global Palestinian connections of this project. Did you see what's going on here? So he wrote a book about how this great Palestine activist was actually a cult leader and was actually anti-Semitic and was actually a sexual predator and a pervert and was this evil person who supported dictators like Gaddafi and the fucking Zionists paid them to do it. And I mean, if that doesn't tell you how much the left is controlled opposition, I mean, I don't know what to say, right? And if you read, I take Jerry Healy's, I defend Jerry Healy, right? I defend Jerry Healy in this book, and I show how Aiden Beatty just, defames him like you wouldn't believe. Jerry Healy never raped anybody, right? He never raped anybody. And if you look at the details, he's not even accused of raping anybody. He never raped anybody. He had affairs. He had girlfriends, right? He was a player. He was a what do you call it? He was a ladies' man. He was what do you call it? I don't even know what you want to call it. He was a womanizer. Okay, keep your sex life out of organizations. But there is so much lying in Aiden Beatty's book, and he just lies so blatantly. And the fact that DSA did this, why did they do this? Because pro-Palestine activism is happening right now. That's the trendy cause. In 2024, all the leftists that weren't out campaigning for Kamala Harris were marching for Palestine. And so the CIA and the Mossad is concerned that among the Palestine protests, people like Jerry Healy might arise. People that could build an effective movement and do what Jerry Healy did might be arising among the Palestine movement. And it's a study into the mindset and the psychology of people like Jerry Healy and warning about how they might arise. This is opposition research. They're trying to control the left, and they want to make sure somebody who's effective like Jerry Healy does not emerge. And you look at that, right? And you look at how, certain people like Hasan Piker that are, that are dumb as a box of rocks get inflated and suddenly become the voice of leftism when they couldn't even stand with the Uhuru movement. And certain other people get their reputation smeared and run through the mud and all of this. I'm telling you, it's because the left is controlled. And the problem is that people go along with this and people play ball with this. That's the problem, right? That's the problem. And that's what bothers me. It's not that it happens. Of course, we should expect nothing less from our enemies. The problem is there are people that go along with this. People that go along with this. That's the problem, right? People who Hasan Piker is going to be our leader now, right? They told us, he's our leader. He can't even defend Mao when they're canceling him over Mao. He can't even say any of the stuff I just spent an hour telling you all. And he's going to be our leader now, right? We're just going to roll out the red carpet for him. And instead of doing what Noah and I did and going to the conference and getting real anti-imperialism out and getting kicked out, which was the right thing to do, right? Instead, we're just going to go there and take selfies. Oh, we're in the same place as Hasan Piker. Oh, look at us. Oh. It's just like unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And you think those people are real revolutionaries? You think the people that, that went and took selfies at a conference where Hasan Piker was, you think those are the vanguard? You think those are the people that are going to lead us to revolution? You think those are the people that, they're the ones. There's, what is wrong with you? Social media is toxic. Social media in a lot of cases brings out the worst in people. It makes people competitive and all of that. But it's like, the fact that somebody is cool on the internet is not a reason to follow them. It's really not, right? I think Jesus Christ said, "You shall know them by their fruits," right? A lot of these people, what has Hasan Piker ever done? He went to Cuba. That's great. He spoke at a Palestine conference. That's great. But what organization work has he ever done? What activism has he ever done? What demonstrations has he ever organized? What has he ever done? He's just been cool on the internet. So why are you following him? And there's certain other people I could say, what have they ever done? But they're cool on the internet, so we're going to follow them. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe you should follow people who actually get stuff done. People who actually have skin in the game and make great sacrifices for all this. Maybe that's who you should be following. you know? I don't know why. I guess it's because I'm having allergies and I've been blowing my nose and I had to start late. But for some reason tonight, I guess I'm in a little bit more of an agitated state than I normally am. You know, look, we have a great organization. We're doing great stuff. There's no reason to be negative. But I guess what what frustrates me is I really just want you to see it. I really, really want you to see it. I really do. I really, really want you to see it. Look, I'm going to calm myself down. I know there are some people who really don't like it when I talk religion on here. They don't, right? There are people who get on here and they think, Caleb, he's talking religion again. Well, look, if it wasn't for religion, I don't know what I would do. If it wasn't for my relationship with God and Jesus Christ, I would have lost my mind already because I mean, it's just the world out there can be frustrating, but you have to just be optimistic and you have to focus on the good things. So I'm just gonna end my opening remarks tonight with a religious insight that I gained, a Christian insight. So if you take offense to that, and you want to stop listening, I don't care. You can do that. I respect your right to not listen to me. I'm going to get religious here for a little bit, not too religious, but I wanted to just touch on something, right? I wanted to just touch on an insight that I just gained. I just want to touch on this. So, there's a parable in the Bible, a story that Jesus tells that is, like to make a point, right? A parable. And it's the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, right? So I'm gonna put the parable of Lazarus and the rich man on the screen because it actually has. I've come to understand it differently, right? So, right, it's in the book of Luke, right? It's recounted. Jesus tells this story to his followers, the story of Lazarus and the rich man. I'm going to put it on here, and I'm just going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about Lazarus and the rich man. So hold on. Hold your horses. I'm going to put Lazarus and the rich man on here, and then I'll answer people's questions. But before I do that, before I put Lazarus and the rich man on, I mean, I guess, as a way of calming us down, I will talk about this. This is very, very important. And I just, there are some things in this world, it's like there should be more outrage about this. But, because I live in New York City, this image just stuck with me. And I don't want to be negative on here. I don't want to dwell on the bad. But sometimes if people are not talking about the bad, you need to acknowledge the bad, right? I live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn. I used to live in Queens. I don't live in Queens now, but I did live in Queens when I first moved to the city. I lived in Ozone Park. And, I mean, Queens lost. They lost somebody. Sergeant Angel Rampersad, resident of Queens. And she's dead. And she died so that Israel can be more safe in murdering Palestinian children. And I mean, the fact that somebody from our community, somebody that I could have passed on the street, is dead now because our leaders are so committed to making sure that Israel is safe, to making sure that Iran doesn't resist Israel, doesn't stop Israel from killing the Palestinians and expanding. The fact that this beautiful person is dead because Israel and their crimes against the Palestinians are just so important. It's just so goddamn important that Israel be able to not feel scared of Iran and not feel threatened by Iran, that she got sent to the other side of the world to get her head blown off. I mean, it makes you angry. I mean, you know, and I mean, I used to live in Queens, and, you know, when I first moved to New York City, I rented the basement of a family in Queens, and the woman in the family that I rented from was a high school teacher. And she talked about how there was a lot of military recruiting that went on at the high school that she went into, you know, you know, and how she really didn't like Anthony Weiner because he was the representative of Queens at that time. And she said, you know, every time he came to the school and he's always saying, oh, join the military. You got to join the military. You know, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with joining the military, right? I mean, people join the military because they want to protect their country. People want to join the military because they want to stop terrorism and all of that. But, you know, this young woman from Queens, she's never coming home because Israel, Israel, you know, I mean, we just got to stop Iran. We got to keep Israel safe. I mean, if that doesn't make you angry, right? If that's not, you know, and then people call us unpatriotic, right? That's what they say is like, Caleb, you're anti-American. I can't think of anything more anti-American than throwing away American lives for Israel. That's anti-American, right? I mean, I mean, how can you look us in the face and say that you're a patriot and you love our country and you would let somebody like this die? You would sacrifice their life just so, you know, so Israel can be secure. It's infuriating, and we should all be angry about it. And I'm not here to spew negativity, and I'm not here to focus on the bad, but I mean, I could have passed her on the subway, right? I could have passed her on the subway. I mean, think about that, right? Anyone who's ever been to Queens, that's very well could have been, you know, that was somebody's child. That was probably somebody's big sister. That was somebody's aunt, somebody's, you know, niece. I mean, this is so wrong. For what? Not for a good cause. Not for a good cause, folks. There's no good cause, right? Iran's not going to get a nuclear weapon. And if they did, that would be their, you know, that would be their right. You know, Israel's got a huge stockpile of nuclear weapons and is always threatening them. You know, absolutely infuriating. So I guess I'm justifying my grumpy mood to you all. I'm feeling a little grumpy, and I think I've got a reason to feel a little bit grumpy, right? I've got a reason to be upset. I've got a reason to be outraged, right? You know, because and she's not the only one. I mean, we've lost 18 American soldiers in this war so far. 18 Americans have been killed because Israel should be able to murder Palestinians without Iran bothering them. I mean, if that doesn't make you angry, you know, I'm always mad. But anyway, so now to get our minds in a better place, we're going to talk some scripture. We're going to talk Bible a little bit, you know, to try and get our minds out of this frustrating place. I'm just going to talk about, you know, a passage from the Bible. This is the rich man and Lazarus, right? And this is one of Jesus's parables. It's from the book of Luke, right? And it's interesting because I'd heard this before, but I came to understand it differently. I developed a new understanding, a new insight. I actually watched a film online, and it got me thinking about this, right? So this is the story of Lazarus and the rich man. So we're just going to go through it, right? Which I think it's insightful. So here we go. All right. All right, Lazarus and the rich man. We're just waiting for the images to come up here. Right? It's a parable from the book of Luke. All right. Rich man and Lazarus. It's Luke 19 to 31. So there we go. Why will the images not come up? I'm waiting for the images to come up on the screen. All right. All right. There we go. All right. Okay. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by angels into Abraham's bosom, and the rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham far off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of my finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. And Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in my lifetime received thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And beside all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that which would pass from hence to you cannot, and neither can they pass to us that which would come from thence. And the story goes on. And beside all of this, and then he said, I pray thee, therefore, Father, that thou would send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they come into the place of torment. And Abraham said unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, but let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto them, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. So what is that saying? So the story is that there's a very, very rich man who lives in splendor, and there's a very, very poor man outside his house. And this poor man is begging for crumbs and is poor, and dogs are constantly licking his wounds. And one night they both die. And the poor man goes to heaven. And the rich man goes to hell. And the rich man is in hell, and he's being tormented. And he says, my goodness, he says, can you just bring me, a tip of water, because I to cool the pain, because it's just so hot in hell. And he says, can you send me back to tell my rich friends about, what happens when you die, and maybe they can change their ways. And he says, no, if they can't hear from, they don't hear it from Moses and the prophets, they don't hear it from other people, they're not gonna hear it from you. It doesn't really matter. And he says, but surely, if I come back from the dead, then they'll believe me. And he says, no, if they didn't hear it from them, and somebody coming back from the dead isn't going to get them to change their ways either. What's this saying? Well, what's interesting is that they've done like many cartoon versions of this story for kids and stuff. And in a lot of the cartoon versions, the rich man is being really mean to the poor person. The rich man is a bully and all of that. But actually, it doesn't say any of that. All the rich man did was be rich. There was a beggar outside named Lazarus, who was at the gate, full of sores, and he was desiring to be fed with crumbs. And, and all Lazarus did is he was a rich man. And there was this poor person outside, and Lazarus didn't do anything. Right? What did he do? It's not like Lazarus was a murderer. It's not like the rich man was a murderer. The rich man wasn't a rapist. The rich man wasn't an evil person. He was just rich, and then he died. He didn't do anything. That's the point. He didn't do anything. He was indifferent to this poor person's suffering, right? There was somebody outside of his house who was so poor and desperate that he was begging for crumbs, and he was wounded and injured, and dogs were licking his sores, and this rich man didn't care about him. He didn't care at all. He was completely indifferent. And that's the point. It's a warning about human beings being indifferent to each other's suffering. And that is the greatest evil in a lot of ways, when people don't care about each other, when people just think that, hey, if somebody else is suffering, who cares, right? Especially when someone's very, very wealthy, right? And they're living in luxury, and it's like, oh, other people are suffering. Well, not my problem. Not my problem. There's a guy right outside my window who's desperately hungry and is wounded, and dogs are licking his sores, and not my problem. I don't care. Well, and then the second part kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier tonight, which is that, he says when he's in hell, when he's being tormented, he says, oh my goodness, send me back to tell my friends. And Abraham says, no, we're not going to send you back. We're not going to send you back, because if they're not going to listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to listen to people saying this is wrong now. Why would they listen to you? And he says, well, if I come back from the dead, right, they'll see that I came back from the dead. They'll have to listen to me. And he says, no, actually, no. If they didn't listen before, doesn't matter if you come back from the dead. Maybe somebody will come back from the dead. They still won't listen. Well, that last part is alluding to the resurrection of Jesus. It's basically saying, there are going to be people that even when Jesus comes back from the dead, they're still not going to care, right? That's what it's alluding to, right? But it's basically saying there are some people that just won't hear it, right? No matter what, right? You can tell them, you can show them in a million ways. They had to treat people better, but they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. And they're basically saying, look, we can bring you back from the dead. That's not going to make a difference, right? If we bring you back from the dead as a ghost and we present you in front of them and you warn them to be nice to other people and care about other people, they're still not going to hear you. And that's true, right? And actually that's the unfortunate reality of some things, right? That there are certain people out there that it does not matter, right? So I saw somebody in the chat said he's Scrooge. And I thought that's interesting. He's Scrooge. Right. I mean, that's right. Scrooge. Right. That's the story of the Ghost of Christmas Past. Right. That's kind of right. The Charles Dickens story is like, the Christmas Carol is somebody actually does come back from the dead, and Scrooge does change his ways. But I just thought that was interesting. So I just wanted to share that with all of you. Right. The story is warning about not caring for your neighbor. And it's also warning that, they say you can't take it with you. Right. Right. And he said, remember that you in your lifetime received good things, and Lazarus received evil things, but now he's comforted and you're tormented. You can have $1 million. You can have a huge mansion. When you're dead, you can't take it with you. Right. The only thing that lives on is what you do for other people, and the kindness and the love that you experience in this life. And, this guy built up all his treasures on earth. And when he got to the next life, he was tormented. So I think that's an interesting story. And I thought about it differently, right? It's about indifference. It's about suffering. Right. So I just wanted to share that with people. So anyhow, so now we're going to do the roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? We got John McCarthy in Chicago. Good to see you, John. We got Jake in Portland, Oregon. Good to see you, Jake. Scrooge shares the concept of social. Diana in Orlando, Florida. I don't know what that part means. Southern California. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Andre in Toronto. Ryan in Kansas City. Joe Gutierrez in California. Good to see you, Joe. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Man Ray in China. Wow, that's cool. I hope you liked it, Man Ray. There we go. Kat in Sydney is with us tonight. Names and locations. Anybody else with us tonight? Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Yeah, very good. You know, I was talking to somebody from Canada the other day. Why are there so many YouTubers from Canada? Right? And oh, Paul and Brentwood. Paul just did a great recording, by the way, of my essay about Luigi Mangione and the abstract painter and stuff. You should go check it out. I will link it later tonight. Gabby in Chicago is with us as always. Gabby is awesome. But Paul's recording is very good. It's on the community page here on this YouTube channel, but I'll share the link later. Unfortunately, I live in dumb fuckistan. Well, I wouldn't be happy if I lived in dumb fuckistan too. That must be an awful place to live. So, yeah, there you go. And Paul has a great voice. He does indeed have a great voice. Absolutely. 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 All right. So, so now, I'm going to answer people's questions. So if you have a question for me to answer, I would encourage you to go to buymeacoffee.com and send it. Oh, we got Marvin in New Jersey. Send the question, buymeacoffee.com. You can also do a super chat like Jesse did, or you can do a Rumble rant if you're on the Rumble. Oh, we got a couple of those too. Yeah, people are asking questions tonight, so send questions. Questions are always appreciated. So yeah, send your questions. I'll do the super chat first since we haven't done super chats. People, remember, you can do super chats. I know Buy Me a Coffee can get a little complicated, which it's fine. I prefer you do Buy Me a Coffee, but super chats are cool too. What's your take on Pol Pot and Democratic Kampuchea? So, I have wondered about that for some time. It was something that there's not a lot of writing about. Obviously there's a lot of literature about the atrocities that went on and bad things that went on. But, from a communist perspective, right? What do communists think about it? Right. Generally, the best book I've ever read on the topic is this one, which is called The Revolution Rescued by Erwin Silber. This book was published by Erwin Silber, who was a folk musician, and he worked for The Guardian. And this was from Line of March publications, right? Line of March, which was one of the Maoist groups that broke with, that as China kind of made clear in the 80s, they didn't want communists. They didn't really need communist allies. They kind of pivoted into the Soviet camp. Line of March, they used to call them Left of Moscow. Line of March put out this book, The Revolution Rescued, where they basically argued that when Vietnam invaded Cambodia and removed Pol Pot, that was good, right? That this book basically says that Vietnam's intervention into Cambodia to remove Pol Pot was correct. I agree with that. I see Pol Pot in a rather negative light. My understanding of the Pol Pot conflict comes from this. Also, the text that gave me the orientation, which I don't necessarily agree with this now. I mean, I have questions about it. Imperialism and the Crisis in the Socialist Camp by Sam Marcy, right? I was in the Workers' World Party, and their book on the Kampuchea War that they published by Sam Marcy was called Imperialism and the Crisis in the Socialist Camp. And both of these are online, right? That book I just did, you can find a PDF of it. And then the Sam Marcy, Imperialism and the Crisis in the Socialist Camp, you can find. I view Pol Pot in a very negative light. Pol Pot, it's now proven he was supported by the United States, and that, that basically China and the Soviet Union had divided. Were not allies, and China needed, needed support. Oh, Rachel from Milwaukee. Great. Glad to hear it. Glad you liked it. China needed foreign investment. And as the 1970s went on, China was pivoting more and more into the American camp. And that was clear. After Mao died, at that point, China, they ended the Cultural Revolution, they arrested the Gang of Four, and Deng Xiaoping came in. And at that point, they really wanted, to pivot into the American camp. They wanted foreign investment. They started having foreign investment. So, China was very much on the opposite side of the Soviet Union in most countries in the world. Pol Pot was the leader of Cambodia, and he was on the Chinese side. He called himself a Maoist communist. Pol Pot's policies in Cambodia were outrageous. He forcibly deported everyone from the cities, and he claimed that they could build full communism in Cambodia on the basis of an agrarian economy. Degrowth, right? I mean, that was basically what he argued. We don't need industrialization. We can build agrarian communism. We're going to make everyone go into the countryside. And then in the countryside, we're going to build full communism on the basis of poverty. And that was the line of the Gang of Four in China. The Gang of Four in China, they said that, you could reach a higher stage in poverty. This idea that you can, build communism with willpower. This idea that you can build a classless society just by forcing it on people. You can't. The basis of building a classless society is abundance. It is the eradication of scarcity. The only way you build a society where there's equality is when there's enough for everybody. As long as there is scarcity, some will have and some will have not. And China started to realize that in the 70s. Pol Pot did not. And China, that was their line. Poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious. What that meant was we're going to try and build up vast material abundance. And so we can eliminate scarcity, and that will lead to the elimination of inequality. And we're going to have a planned economy to create abundance. Whereas, during the Cultural Revolution, they'd said, well, we can create a higher stage in poverty, meaning we can just, through willpower, we can create an egalitarian society. Pol Pot was very much trying to create an egalitarian society with willpower. And he was trying to make everyone in a deeply, deeply poor country, Cambodia, absolutely equal. He abolished money, confiscated all the money and burned it. Forcibly deported all the people from the cities to the countryside because that was fair, because most people lived in the countryside. So the cities were forcibly evacuated. He was trying to make everyone equal in poverty. You can't do that. And it was, I view him as almost like, you could argue he was kind of like a peasant revolutionary. I mean, there was an element of like peasant Jacobinism, right? He was trying to make everyone equal in Cambodia in poverty. And it was disastrous. And he largely, the people he killed were largely other communists who were in his own party. They were the pro-Soviet and pro-Vietnamese wing of the Communist Party of Cambodia. That's who he was killing largely. And so Vietnam invaded Cambodia to rescue the pro-Vietnamese communists and remove Pol Pot. I think that was the right thing to do. And China then invaded Vietnam in support of Cambodia. And that was in support of Pol Pot. That was a disaster. I think very negatively of Pol Pot. And one thing that frustrates me is that they will frequently point to Pol Pot as an example of why communism is evil, when the USA supported him, right? We're told, oh, well, communism is so evil and all of that. Look at Pol Pot. The USA supported Pol Pot. I mean, you can say that with Stalin. You can say that with Mao. You could say that but the USA supported Pol Pot, and the USA was aligned with Pol Pot, and it was the Vietnamese communists who removed. It was communists who removed Pol Pot. It was the USA who had supported him, right? What was clear is after the USA lost the Vietnam War, you had what was called the Trilateral Commission. The Rockefeller family, David Rockefeller, they sponsored a think tank called the Trilateral Commission that was headed by Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger. And the Trilateral Commission was aimed at reinventing U.S. foreign policy in order to, not have an epic loss like in Vietnam. And one thing that they figured out with the Trilateral Commission was we have to manipulate communists against each other. And as the USA pulled out of Vietnam, you'll notice that the communists of Cambodia started fighting with the communists of Vietnam, right? And that The USA was covertly supporting the communists of Cambodia, and the Soviet Union was supporting the communists of Vietnam. And there was a big, ugly war. And eventually China invaded Vietnam to support the communists of Cambodia, right? And I've heard many times that, that there was a Vietnam veteran that said, in 1980, the USA brought back draft registration. And there was a lot of protests because of the Vietnam War, but the Soviet Union intervened in Afghanistan. So Jimmy Carter brought back draft registration. There was a lot of protests. And at one of those protests, a Vietnam veteran very famously said, they said that I was sent to Vietnam to fight communists, but now America is supporting the Cambodian communists who are fighting the Vietnamese communists. And the Vietnamese communists are now being attacked by the Chinese communists. And they're doing it because they say the Vietnamese are agents of the Russian communists. It made no sense, right? And that, after the USA withdrew from Vietnam in 1973, 1975, when the fall of Saigon, when, Vietnam was reunified, there was still another 5 years of war in Vietnam. And the war was largely communists killing other communists. And that was what they had set out to do with the Trilateral Commission. The idea is to manipulate, different forces against each other. And at the same time, right, in the Middle East, right, you had Iraq that was Ba'athist Arab socialism. And you had Iran, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, Shia Muslims. And the USA supported Iraq to invade Iran and try to overthrow the Islamic Republic. And then halfway through the war, the USA switched and started supporting Iran against Iraq. And the war went on for a decade. For 10 years, Iran and Iraq were fighting each other. At least 1 million people died. They didn't mention it on American television. They didn't talk about it. And it just went on. And it was later revealed that the USA was on both sides of the war at various times. At the beginning, they were clearly supporting Saddam Hussein. And then at the end, they were clearly supporting Iran. And that the USA was hoping to weaken both sides. They viewed, that they were two anti-imperialist forces. And the idea was, okay, well, the Ba'athist Arab socialists are anti-imperialists and Shia Muslim Persians are anti-imperialists. And but there are two groups of anti-imperialists that are not going to ever agree. And that was the thing. Arab socialism was very much a secular ideology. They didn't believe in having a Muslim government. And they were also very much, they celebrated the Arab ethnicity. The Iranians are not Arabs, they're Persians. And the Islamic Revolution of Iran was not a secular revolution at all. It was a Shia Muslim, it was an Islamic revolution. So the two groups were going to be at odds with each other. And Iraq has a Shia Muslim majority, whereas Saddam Hussein and the leaders of the Ba'ath Party were all Sunnis. And they were advocates of a secular government. So when Iran had an Islamic revolution of Shia, that made Iraq really nervous that the Shia Muslims, the more religious Shia Muslims that were opposed to the secular Arab government, might revolt against them. And so you had the Iraq-Iran war, and it went on and on and on. Right. And it turned into, in a lot of ways, the Iraq-Iran war turned into a civil war in both Iran and Iraq, because the Mujahideen Khalq, one of the big communist groups in Iran, worked for Saddam Hussein and was airdropped into Iran and raised villages. They had what they called the Iranian National Liberation Army that was airdropped by Iraq, and they exterminated villages and killed people. And they were Persians. They were Iranians, but they were communists. They were, secular, they call themselves Islamo-Marxists or whatever. And in Iraq, you had various Shia Muslims that took up arms against Saddam Hussein, and they were Arabs. They were not Iranians, but they believed in having a Shia Muslim government. So in Iraq and Iran, the Iraq-Iran war, in a lot of ways, it was kind of a civil war in both of the countries between different forces. And it was a disaster. And 1 million people died, and that benefited the United States. And this kind of thing happened in Africa during these years. Ethiopia, 78, Ethiopia had the Derg, right? The Islamic or the Marxist-Leninist government in Ethiopia. And Eritrea had been waging a civil war against the government of Ethiopia. But then the United States started supporting the Eritrean communists to fight against the Derg, right? And Eritrea separatism was led by communists, and it was backed by the United States, and they eventually won, and they're in power, and the USA hates them, right? The government of Eritrea, the USA considers it the North Korea of Africa and all that. Well, they funded them to fight the Derg to begin with, right? And that was, yeah, this is a quote. Is this a real quote? I encourage the Chinese to support Pol Pot. Pol Pot was an abomination. We could never support him, but China could. Well, America did. America did support him, and that's proven now. But, it was part of this strategy to divide, and to manipulate communists against each other. The beginning of the Cold War, America was losing. And America was losing because even though America had mighty military might, it was the David and Goliath story, right? People have been telling the story of David and Goliath for 4,000 years. And who's ever supported Goliath, right? People want to support the underdog. And the USA bombs Korea, kills 4 million people on the Korean Peninsula, and all of that. And yeah, maybe the USA can win the firepower, but the world is going to sympathize with the Koreans. And Vietnam, right? The reason the USA lost in Vietnam was because the world largely supported the Vietnamese people. In France and Germany, all over the world, even in America, people started supporting the Vietnamese as the David fighting Goliath. And the USA was losing the Cold War at the beginning because even though they were winning in a lot of cases like Indonesia and other things, they were just looking like the bad guy. So as the late Cold War set in, the USA stopped looking like the bad guy and started manipulating different communists against each other. And that is more the liberal strategy, and that's Brzezinski and all of that. So I view Pol Pot in the context of that. But yeah, the two books that I know that give me the line on that is Revolution Rescued by Erwin Silber and Imperialism and the Crisis in the Socialist Camp by Sam Marcy. Sam Marcy, I will say, I think he's a little bit, he supported the Gang of Four. He thought the Cultural Revolution was good, and he didn't say that China restored capitalism in 78 or whatever, but he still was sad to see the Gang of Four arrested. He was wrong about that. Marcy thought the Cultural Revolution was good, and he was wrong. The Cultural Revolution was not good. The Cultural Revolution, again, it was an attempt to create an egalitarian society in poverty. So yeah. So yeah, not a good thing to do. Not a good thing to do. So yeah, that's my answer. Long answer. But that's the kind of thing. If you ask me about that, I can give you a long answer. Sometimes people ask me questions I don't have a lot to say on. That I have a lot to say on. So all right. So now we'll go to the Buy Me a Coffees. All right. So Anarcho Menshevik said, do you have any handy source for the claim the Democrats could have prevented the Iran war, but took a recess until Trump had already started bombing? They didn't take a recess. They just pushed the vote over the weekend, right? The war started on February 28th, Saturday. Thomas Massie put up a resolution to tie Trump's hands, and they delayed the voting on the resolution until Monday. That's documented. Look up Thomas Massie, War Powers resolution, and look at how the Democrats tabled it, and there wasn't a vote until Monday. It just happened. Look at the chain of events. That's the only source you need is the chain of events. Look up Thomas Massie, War Powers resolution, right? Here, Thomas Massie, War Powers resolution, February 27th, right? Yeah. So there we go. Around February 27th announcement, Massie vocally criticized engagement, said, I'm opposed to this war. There were votes, but the votes were delayed until early March, right? February 27th, which is the day before the war started, Thomas Massie was in Congress trying to oppose it, and the vote was delayed so the war could actually happen. I talked about the Ortega thing. I mean, they're just lying. They're just lying about Ortega. Why do they lie? Why do they have to lie? Right? I mean, when they lie so blatantly, when they say Ortega said we're never going to have elections again, we're just never going to have elections again, which is not what he said. Yeah, I talked about that. I ranted about that one for quite a bit, Anarcho Menshevik. So yeah, I ranted about that for quite some time. So yeah, there we go. Gavin says books that humanize Mao. Okay, so there are two biographies of Mao that are written by Han Suyin, right? So this is Han Suyin, right? Han Suyin was an American Chinese novelist. She wrote a romance novel that was like a bestseller called Love is a Many Splendored Thing. You know, it was a big hit. They made a movie of it and stuff like that. It was just a really popular thing. And she's Chinese American, and she became a communist. And so then she wrote like a 2-part biography of Mao. The Morning Deluge is about Mao before the revolution. And then the book about Mao after the revolution is called Wind in the Tower. And those are like the most sympathetic biographies in English that you'll find of Mao. You know, and those are, you know, I mean, it's not, I mean, you can find some official like Chinese government stuff, but as far as something that's not like official Chinese government material, you know, in terms of books that make, that get into who Mao really was, the Han Suyin books are probably the most, the best you can get. Now, Edgar Snow, the American journalist from Missouri, he was the first person to ever interview Mao, and he was the last person to ever interview Mao. He wrote Red Star Over China, which I think I might have here on the shelf. Red Star Over China. Red Star Over China was a hit best-selling book in the 1930s, when Mao was kind of, the U.S. government was curious about whether Mao would be a useful ally to fight Japan. And so Edgar Snow was this American journalist, and he interviewed Mao, and he met Mao in the Red Army camp, and he wrote this book that kind of tells Mao's life story and kind of tells the story of the Red Army. And I guess I don't have it on the shelf. I thought I had it on the shelf. It's called Red Star Over China. And that gets into Mao's life story, and it has like very long, detailed interviews with Mao where he talks about his family, and he talks about like growing peppers, how he had the hobby of growing peppers. And, you know, I mean, it really does. I mean, you want to talk about humanizing Mao, that book really, really humanizes Mao, the leader of the Red Army from the Red Army camp. So there we go. So there's that. And also then, before he died, Edgar Snow got to interview Mao once more, and he wrote a book, which I think I also have on the shelf. I thought I did. Yeah. No, do I? I have all these books somewhere. He wrote a book called The Long Revolution, which I guess it was assembled after his death, but it was his final book, and it included his final interview with Mao. And, you know, like, you know, he met with Mao in like 1970. And the book is a little bit negative on the Cultural Revolution, which is good. So, yeah, The Long Revolution is good. The Long Revolution, Red Star Over China by Edgar Snow. Those books, you know, also get into Mao's personality. Right? So, yeah, I'm trying to think what other books about Mao's personality. There is a Chinese government book called With Mao on the Long March. So, you know, sometimes, you know, official government material, people will roll their eyes at or whatever. But honestly, you know, I found it very amusing. It's called With Chairman Mao on the Long March. With Chairman Mao on the Long March. And it's by one of Mao's personal, like, servants. Yeah, and here's the PDF of it. And this guy was Mao's servant. Like, you know, his like personal secretary, his personal assistant or whatever during the Long March. And it really, I mean, it is an official Chinese government book. So, you know, people may say, okay, well, that's, you know, it's not going to be his honest opinion. You know, he's going to be giving the party line. Well, you know, maybe. But, you know, I mean, there are details in this book that just, you know, I mean, you know, that don't serve a political purpose, that are probably just real observations. And I read this book when I was in high school, and I was really kind of moved by it. I found it kind of amusing. I mean, it kind of gave you an understanding of Mao's kind of personal approach. I also, in We Are City Builders, right, the CPI manual, we published, we republished a speech by Mao that is transcribed. It's called, the name of it is not a good name, because you would think it's like a boring talk about dialectical materialism or something, but it's a really actually very moving speech that Mao gave to a group of college students, and it's called Talk on the Question of Philosophy. Awful name. But it's amazing because Mao goes off script. He tells stories, he tells jokes, he talks about his personal life. He tells all the students that knowledge, they need to go down to the countryside. He talks about how, like, this peasant, he recruited him to being a communist by playing dominoes with him, and he would lose money, but the peasant would listen to him about communism, and he won this this peasant over to being a communist by playing dominoes with him, and that's really powerful as well. And that's Mao off script. The thing is that a lot of Mao's speeches are very, very formal, very, very formal. And because of that, you don't really get much of his personality. But there is this book, and this book, people are a little bit suspicious of it, right? I mean, who cares really? But this is Chairman Mao Talks to the People. So the published works of Chairman Mao that are available from the Chinese government end in 1963. And the final years of Mao's life, right? Mao died in 1976. There's not a lot that you can find, but this book, Chairman Mao Talks to the People, it was compiled by Stuart Schramm. People think Stuart Schramm may have been a CIA agent, right? It doesn't really matter, but Stuart Schramm published this book, Chairman Mao Talks to the People, that has a lot of speeches that Mao gave that are not included in the selected works that was officially published by the Chinese government, that are speeches he gave during the Cultural Revolution. There's the speech he gave on the Lin Biao affair, which I actually may want to revisit in light of the Khrushchevism book, because it's a little strange. After the fall of Lin Biao, Mao kind of gives a rant against cult of personality, which is very odd. And he accuses Lin Biao and Chen Bodai of trying to build a cult of personality around him. Well, there certainly was what you might call a cult of personality around Mao. But yeah, the talk on the Lin Biao affair, right, from 1971, and it's like Mao gets up there and he says, "Oh, you can't worship individuals," and it's a little odd, the odd thing to say, but he claimed the claim was that Lin Biao was trying to build a cult of personality around Mao Zedong and worship him, and we believe in science and we believe in communism. It's a very strange response. And then he launches the anti-Confucius campaign, right, when they launched against Confucius, and that's very interesting. I may want to revisit that actually. But it's got a lot of stuff that Mao did during the Cultural Revolution years, which now the Chinese Communist Party doesn't uphold, right? The Chinese Communist Party, you read their official history, which I've got their 3-volume official history here. They repudiate the Cultural Revolution years. I mean, the 1969 Congress of the Chinese Communist Party is repudiated. They don't recognize it. Because they say the people that attended were not party members, they were Red Guards. And so it's interesting. So yeah, I mean, if you want to dig into who Mao really was, I'm working on a short pamphlet. I'm going to use the Hasan Piker thing to do like a short little book thing, and who knows, maybe it'll get some attention, maybe not. So I don't know. I mean, I will say one of the biggest problems, this is kind of why CPI, we're not trying to do the communism thing. We dip our feet into it. Okay. I do streams about communist topics and stuff like that, but we're not trying to win communism, because communism is such a polluted world. It's such a polluted world. The first thing you learn, when you become a communist, is that there's all these other communists and they're bad. And no one listens to anybody else, and no one wants to learn anything. Everyone in that circle, in those circles, thinks they know everything already. Anyway, John McCarthy bought a coffee, said, "I hate what Trump is doing to Rania Khalek and PSL, but I just had to tell them about themselves." So what is Trump doing to Rania Khalek and the PSL? Right? Right? What is he doing to Rania? Right? Trump wants to cancel us. We're not backing down. I see the State Department put out an article, about Cuba stuff. CPI tried warning you how dangerous Biden's attack on Uhuru was, and it was a threat to all of us. You didn't listen. And now we're all in trouble. I hate what's happening to you, and I wish you'd helped us stop it. Well, good. I'm going to retweet you. And this is a video of Chairman O'Malley gives an answer about answer. Yeah, there you go. I mean, yeah, we do have to look, we can't support what they're doing to answer just because we disagree with them. As a matter of principle, no one should be targeted for being an anti-imperialist. And so Hasan Piker and PSL, all of them shouldn't be targeted for their anti-imperialist views, right? It's that simple, right? And if we're okay with them going after one group of anti-imperialists and then we're not okay with them going, we can't do it that way. So as a matter of principle, we must support them. They're not being charged, from what I understand, but they're being, the State Department's publishing articles calling people Cuban agents and stuff like that. So yeah, and it was Rania. Rania tried to cancel Jose Vega. They did that whole video that I showed of Brian Becker and Rania Kolick, defaming Jose Vega when he was famous, and calling Jose Vega, saying LaRouche was a cult, and defaming him and all that. And it's a problem. There is a partisan aspect to all of this, and that's what I said on the last stream, and I'll say this again. It's true. It doesn't matter, right? It shouldn't affect necessarily how we respond to this, but it explains the behavior of multiple people. It explains Marco Rubio's behavior. It also explains PSL and the behavior of PSL and some of these other forces, Rania and others, that the Uhuru movement are not Democrats. They ran against the Democrats in the elections in Florida. They called out Obama, and they refused to go along with Obama mania. They criticized Obama. They've been a thorn in the side of the Democrat Party. So when Biden became, president, he sent the FBI to go after them. And Scott Ritter has always been a Republican, right? He's a conservative. He's anti-imperialist, and but he comes out of Republican circles from the U.S. Marines, right? They went after him. Well, now Marco Rubio is running the State Department. Trump is the president. Well, PSL are Democrats, and Code Pink are Democrats, and People's Forum or Rania Kolick, they're Democrats, and so now they're going after them. And that it's like the reason that PSL didn't really support the Uhuru movement is because they hate them, because they're not Democrats. And the reason PSL didn't really support Scott Ritter and called the Rage Against the War Machine March fascist and was basically calling for everyone there to be killed like Charlie Kirk, is because they're Democrats. That's why. And the reason that, Marco Rubio, the reason that, that Marco Rubio is targeting the Democrat aligned groups is because he's a Republican. Like, there's an element of partisanship to this, but we have to be above that. CPI, we're not Democrats and we're not Republicans. We don't participate in the electoral process. We educate people, and we also stand up for those who are under attack. We will stand up for PSL. We will stand up for anyone who's under attack for being anti-imperialist. We will defend our civil liberties. But, we will call out the inconsistency. And, PSL is more loyal to the Democrat Party than they are to anti-imperialism. And at a time when the Democrats were more pro-war and more interventionist, they didn't question that. And they have no plan to reach the bulk of the American population. They just want to be king of the protest cage. And their response to CPI from the moment we were formed, we're not Republicans, was just that because we waved the American flag, we're Nazis, right? Because we have Christians in our organization, we're evil. They are more opposed to Republicans and conservatives than they are to imperialism. So, and that unfortunately, and I don't want to, how do I say this without getting, I don't know. I don't want to get too negative here, but like that becomes clear when you listen to Danny Haiphong, when you listen to Ben Norton. They're not against imperialism. They're against Americans, right? They're against American flags. They're against the Bible. They're against guns. They're in favor of abortion, right? I will never forget. It was just like the classic moment when fucking Ben Norton was in Nicaragua, the country with the strictest anti-abortion laws in the world. And Roe versus Wade is overturned in America. And he tweets, anyone who opposes abortion is a Nazi, a white supremacist, and a fascist. You're in Nicaragua, dude. You're living in a socialist country. Is Daniel Ortega a fascist? Right? And he's there as a supporter of Daniel Ortega, who has the strictest anti-abortion laws of any country in the world. And it's like, at that point, it's like, you want to shake him. Like, what is wrong with you? But it's like, he's not against imperialism. He's against Republicans. He's against red state Americans. He's against people who look like me. And that's the crazy thing. I hated people who looked like me when I was a kid. I was really angry at all the evangelical Christians I grew up around. I was really angry at my conservative upbringing and little town. I was a nonconformist, and I moved to New York City and all of that. I moved to New York City and I joined a communist group, and I realized that, even though I was really mad about, conservatives I grew up around, and I was they still viewed me as one of the corn people, right? I was actually told that I was one of the corn people, right? You're like the corn people, like I said, I was told by certain people, a certain person, I was told that everyone in Ohio thinks that Jews are born with horns and tails. No, they don't. Right? I have never met anyone in my life who's stupid enough to believe Jews are born with horns and tails. But, a leader of the Workers' World Party told me she knew it for a fact. Everyone in my state of Ohio believes Jews are born with horns and tails. It's just a fact. That's what stupid corn people from stupid corn people places like where I grew up, that's what we believe. Right? That's just how we are. We're just inferior, and we're all in the Ku Klux Klan, and we're all white supremacists, and, and that's how it is, right? And that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if those folks are more anti-war. It doesn't matter if those folks are questioning U.S. foreign policy. No, we're all in the, and there were just certain things that they would do. For example, I remember when the Syrian issue, solidarity with Syria, was going on, right? Well, the Syrians were constantly pointing out the USA is funding terrorists. It's funding Al-Qaeda. The people fighting against the Syrian government are Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And I remember sitting there, and it was leaders of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, leaders of the Workers' World Party, saying to Arab Americans, you can't say that. No, if you say terrorist, that's Islamophobic. And they're sitting there like, no, Americans don't like Al-Qaeda, and America's funding Al-Qaeda. We should point this out. Nuh-uh, you can't say that. That's Islamophobic, right? That'll make people hate Muslims. It's like, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, these are the Arab Americans. These are Muslims telling us to say that, right? These are Syrian Christians. These are Syrian Muslims, Syrian Alawites telling us to highlight the fact that America is supporting Al-Qaeda. And you won't say it because you like Al-Qaeda. I mean, that was basically what they were saying. They wouldn't put it in those terms, but that was basically what it was, is that, they like Al-Qaeda because Al-Qaeda is against America. So we better, we couldn't. And that's one of the things with the left, right? With the Answer Coalition and all of them. It is like a crime in their eyes to ever frame things in a way that might actually convince somebody, right? If it could actually convince somebody who looks like me or is from the areas I grew up in, it's wrong, right? It's pandering to reaction. Right? Sam Marcy, right? He was mad that Gus Hall was the leader of the Communist Party, right? He was mad about it. Why? Well, and he was mad that the Communist Party moved their headquarters from New York City to Chicago. Well, New York City is more multinational. Chicago, that's a reactionary heartland. I mean, it's like they're waging an ethnic war. I mean, it's just like they don't like red state Americans. I mean, that's really all it is. And it's took me a long time to realize that. But if you really read between the lines, especially as people who look like me from small towns who like me, if you look at people like me becoming more and more anti-war, why are they not embracing them? Because they're only anti-war because they want to be against people like me. They don't really oppose the wars. They don't really oppose imperialism. They just oppose red state Americans, right? I mean, it's so evil. And you look at it, it's like, why don't they love Marjorie Taylor Greene? Marjorie Taylor Greene is pro-Palestine now. Marjorie Taylor Greene's defending Iran. Why don't they love her? Well, she's what? She's what? Just say it. Just say it. What is she? What is she? She's a Christian. She's white. What is it? What is it? It's like they won't say it, right? But there's like an element of like, they want to be against anything they view as America. That's what it really gets down to. And I mean, that's not anti-imperialism. That's not a matter of principle. It's like this ethnic emotional thing. It's the spirit of the ghetto, right? It's that, that Jews have been persecuted by white European Christians for hundreds of years. And, and the mindset develops that white European Christians are our enemies. And, when I've told the story, when I first moved to New York City, I couldn't understand it. And then I went to see Sarah Schulman, right? The famous lesbian socialist novelist or whatever, memoirist. And she's up there and she said, when I was a kid, they didn't teach us to hate Arabs in the Jewish community. We were told to hate white European Christians. And that's why we supported the Black Liberation Movement, because they were up against the white European Christians too. And I was like, damn, she just said it right there. And I was like, oh, I get it now. Right. And that, the reason that I am viewed as a bad person by all these communists, right? That, the reason I'm viewed by a bad person is because I'm a white European Christian, and they have been brought up to believe white European Christians want to kill them all. And I mean, the Holocaust, I mean, they have a fair reason for thinking that, right? So I'm not saying they're completely wrong for thinking that, but, you know, there is an ethnic and Zionism, like there's Zionism, blatant support for Israel, and then there's crypto-Zionism, which is not supporting Israel, but also thinking that anti-Semitism is under every rock, thinking that people that criticize Israel are secretly anti-Semitic. You know, that's crypto-Zionism, right? And, you know, I could go on and on about this all night, but yeah, like that's the Answer Coalition. They're crypto-Zionists. I don't think Brian Becker is not Jewish ethnically. It doesn't matter. He's a crypto-Zionist, right? He's a crypto-Zionist. You listen to him. Why is he not inviting Marjorie Taylor Greene to be a speaker at the Answer Coalition's next rally? Why is he not inviting Tucker Carlson to speak at his next rally? Why not? Well, because, you know, Tucker Carlson is the enemy as far as he's concerned. Tucker Carlson supports the Uhuru movement. Tucker Carlson, you know, I mean, is taking amazing anti-war stances, but he's the enemy, not because of his position on war, not because of his position on civil liberties in the police state, but for different reasons, for cultural reasons. They're waging a culture war. And I'm not interested in that culture war. I'm not, right? You know, we've had, you know, anyway, I've said all of this on these streams over and over and over again. So there's no reason to keep repeating myself. So we have the Rumble rants that have come in from Hempcar. But before I answer those, I will put on some music. I have to get some more water. I'm still having some allergies, so forgive me, folks, for my allergies, but still having some allergies. So I'm going to put on some music while I get some more water. And then I'll answer the Rumble rants. Any other questions people want to send in, the best way to do it is to go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. You can send in any questions you've got. So yeah, go buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Send your questions. Yeah, there we go. All right. So yeah, I'm going to put on some music, then I'll answer the questions that are left. So here we go. What song do I want to put on? Hey, we'll put on David Rovick's John Brown.
Owen Brown was an abolitionist. John was Owen's son. He grew up in New England. He was born in Torrington. John Brown was a tanner and a man of many skills. He stood up for the workers who toiled in the mills. He stood up for the Indians. He stood up for the women, for the oppressed and the exploited. This good man stood with them. So when Kansas was bleeding, he went and joined the fray. If the slave trade wanted Kansas, the slave trade would have to pay. Riding through the Kansas prairie with a fine and loyal band. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. With 2,000 of New England's best and bravest sons, Captain Brown fought in Kansas with a Bible and a gun. When Free Lawrence was on fire, lighting up the night, the ruffians would flee, John Brown would stand and fight. Lincoln called him a fanatic, and he was a Christian who thought you should do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. Christ said, love your neighbors, and if your neighbors held in slavery, he was one who felt his duty was to fight to set them free. Riding through the Kansas prairie with a fine and loyal band. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. He drove the slave trade out of Kansas, then rode to bordering Missouri. raided the plantations, no compromise, said he. Broke the chains and shackles, rode at night to Canada. Out of the nightmare, the devil's home, America. He was caught in Harper's Ferry, his family lying dead. They questioned him for hours as he lay there and bled. They hanged him on the gallows, they laid him in his grave. John Brown was a Christian and he died to free the slave. Riding through the Kansas prairie with a fine and loyal band. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand.
All righty. So I guess the remaining questions that have come in, Hemp Carr said, even National Pentagon Radio, as Bill Blum called them, mentioned the Strait of Bab el-Mandab today. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the strait, right? I put the map on here. I mean, this is getting real in the Middle East, folks. I mean, if Trump doesn't end this soon, he's, I mean, you think it's bad now in the economy, right? Already the Strait of Hormuz is closed, right? And there's another strait that's very close to Yemen, the Strait of Bab el-Mandab. And the Houthis are closing that now too. And the Saudis are fighting the Houthis, and the Houthis are fighting the Saudis. And you think our economy is bad now? Yeah, there you go. I mean, yeah, imagine two straits in this area closed. I mean, this is craziness. I mean, Trump has gotten us into a war for no reason. He's gotten our people killed. I mean, this is absolutely crazy. And then the other question that came in was a local Democrat third-party activist sent me this. It goes into the Holomer lie stuff. Any good way to debunk it? Well, look, I mean, it's a similar story, right? It's just, it's that again, like the very borders of Ukraine were drawn by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is why Ukraine has a written language, right? There was no written Ukrainian language before that. I mean, the Soviet Union industrialized Ukraine. I mean, the notion that somehow the Soviet Union was oppressing Ukrainians on an ethnic level, that's a Nazi myth that was invented, right? It was invented by Nazi propagandists to build up their army during the Second World War. And again, if the Soviet Union had wanted to oppress Ukrainians on a national basis, they could have, but they did the opposite. They went out of their way to make sure they had a written language of their own, to teach that language in the schools. They went out of their way to draw borders for this is Ukraine. And then they expanded those borders under Stalin. And then they expanded those borders again under Khrushchev. The Soviet Union was not out to destroy Ukrainians as an ethnic group. And that is such a crazy thing to think. If you look at the history of where the borders of Ukraine came from, where the language of Ukraine came from, I mean, they were not out to do that. And the famine that they say was a genocide against Ukrainians, well, it was a famine in all of the Soviet Union. And again, there were famines all the time. And it was Stalin who cured the famines by mechanizing agriculture. That whole narrative is just bullshit. It's just bullshit. It just doesn't match what actually happened there. But the Nazis are the ones who invented it because they wanted to recruit Ukrainians to fight against the Soviet Union. And then after World War II, the Americans started promoting it. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, it is debunkable. And, Grover Furr has done a good job. There's others. And, the Soviet Union, I mean, Russia has tweeted out, stuff. They've said, look, there was a famine in the USSR in the 1930s, but it was in all of the USSR. It wasn't just in Ukraine. And the idea that that was some intentional effort to exterminate Ukrainians, that's just not what happened. It was largely Ukrainians killing other Ukrainians. The poor Ukrainians went after the wealthy farmers who were hoarding their grain. And then Stalin brought the Red Army in to try and do it in a controlled way to prevent it from just being a a mass slaughter. I mean, it was the kulaks were being killed by other Ukrainians. I mean, the narrative that these people have, this Robert Conquest, Solzhenitsyn stuff, it just doesn't match reality. So, and they just don't know anything about it. They are determined to hear things in a certain way. And that's kind of what I was getting at. I mean, if people really want to interpret, you try your hardest to interpret everything Mao did in the worst possible light, you can come up with 80 million people killed, right? Because of all the babies that weren't born and all this. I mean, it's just, if you really try, you could, I mean, I think Stalin famously said, paper is an amazing substance. It can have even the most utter falsehoods written upon it, right? It has the ability to have even the most utter falsehoods written on it and withstand that. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. I mean, it's just, if you really, really want, you just need to believe, But anyway, folks, I don't see any more questions, and my strength is running out. So I do want to encourage people, if you haven't gotten my new book, check it out. Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism. This is my new book. Keep an eye out. The book that I'm writing now, I've written most of it already. It's going to be very short, and I'm going to try to make it as inexpensive as possible. And I'm making this little pamphlet about Mao, like a defense of Mao kind of pamphlet. And the idea is that it's something really affordable that one could give to their relative or something like that. And we'll see. We'll have fun with it, right? We'll have fun with it. I'm going to try to get it done like tomorrow, because I wrote most of it already. I just need to do some adjustments or whatever. It's very short, and and I'm going to try to just throw my 2 cents into this Hasan Piker Mao debate. So if you all can help me with that, if we can get that book into a few people's hands, have this book create a little bit of a splash next week, that'll be a good thing to do. But why do you think Ukraine had no language before the US? I said written language, Evan. Written language. They made sure there was a written language for Ukraine, right? Until that, there was only Russian. But it was the Soviet Union went out of its way to make sure there was a written Ukrainian language. That is a fact. The Soviet Union, and it wasn't just the Ukrainians that they did that with, right? Lenin was obsessed with nationalities, right? And he wanted to emphasize the different nationalities, right? And that they went out of their way to emphasize nationalities, right? Like that was part of what the Soviet Union did. That was part of the Leninist theory. So, that is a fact, right? That the Ukrainian language, it was in 1925, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic created a commission for the regulation of orthography, right? Yeah, during the period of Ukrainization in the Soviet Union in 1927. The People's Republic of Ukraine adopted official Ukrainian orthographies in 1918 and 1919. that is fact, right? It's because of the Soviet Union that there is a written Ukrainian language. If it was not for the Soviet Union, if there had not been a Bolshevik Revolution, there would never have been a written Ukrainian language. They are the ones who made it, and they drew the borders of Ukraine. There were no borders of Ukraine. It was just Russia. And there was just a region in Russia people called Ukraine. And it was, I am not. And again, you're stretching the truth. I just pulled up Wikipedia. I just read it to you off Wikipedia, right? But that wasn't official. That was not official, right? That was not official. And it wasn't officiated. It wasn't adopted as an official language. And there was not a codified orthography until the Soviet Union came into existence, right? I'm sorry, I'm having allergies. And the borders of Ukraine were drawn by the Soviet Union. The only reason Ukraine thinks Crimea is part of Ukraine is because of the Soviet Union. It's because of Khrushchev, right? I mean, Ukraine is a Soviet creation. So the narrative that the Soviet Union was trying to exterminate and wipe out Ukraine, these people are full of shit. That's just not true. Some things are true and some things are not. If the Soviet Union had wanted to wipe out Ukrainians and wipe out Ukrainianism, right? They could have done it. They did the opposite. They emphasized and pushed and made a written language, had the kids in the school learn Ukrainian. They drew borders. They did everything they could. I mean, it's just like, you just can't say that. right? And I know that goes against everything you've been told, right? Again, we're told that, the famine in 1931 happened because Stalin was up there and said, I want to kill me some Ukrainians. Well, that's not what happened, right? There was, they needed to change their agricultural system. There were other issues, and people starved in other regions other than Ukraine. There was an awful famine. But the narrative, the Ukrainian nationalist narrative that you're promoting, that was created. What you're repeating, Evan, is Nazi propaganda. Right? Hitler wanted to create an army of Ukrainians to fight on his side in World War II. And so this whole narrative that the Russians just want to wipe out the Ukrainian language and wipe out Ukraine, that was all invented by Nazis. Okay. And that's what you're pushing, right? And like you're trying to say, oh, well, okay, well, maybe, yes, obviously people in that region have been speaking in certain ways for a long time, right? And again, you're moving the goalpost. You're moving the goalpost, right? And this is classic dishonesty here, right? Now he's saying that this other language is the same as Ukrainian. I mean, and it's just like, okay, so, this is classic intellectual dishonesty. The borders of Ukraine were drawn by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union required children to learn the Ukrainian language in school. It was required by law in the Soviet Union. Again, I mean, so anyhow, I could argue about this all night. And I mean, if you want to clip this and use this to cancel me, I've been canceled 100,000 times for every awful thing. You Google me, I'm the worst person who's ever existed. I am pure evil. And you should ask my wife. I mean, sometimes I don't flush the toilet. Sometimes I leave my socks on the floor. I'm the worst human being who's ever existed. So if you want to clip this and put this on some Ukrainian blog and say, Caleb said this, go right ahead, right? I am the worst human being who's ever existed. There's never been another person in human history who is as evil as I am, according to the internet. So by all means, go ahead and defame me. I don't care, right? I've been through it, right? Yeah. And yeah, but anyhow, so I gotta go to sleep. You hear my allergies and all of that. I gotta rest. I'm gonna be on Jimmy Dore tomorrow. Tune into Jimmy Dore tomorrow. I'll be on with Garland Nixon as guest hosting. I'm gonna be on. So tune in, everybody. All right. I'll see you all soon. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.